Hi, good morning, everyone. We're so happy to be hosting the 2023 annual conference organized by WCCE Europe with this year's theme, Crafting the Future, New Skills and Opportunities. A few words on the Motocross Foundation and the team. I just wanted to point out a few things. The Motocross Foundation has, since its inception, emphasized the importance of upskilling of artisans in the sector, as there is a great need for artisans to keep up with the new requirements expected not only by the EU and local regulators, but especially by their consumers or audiences who are nowadays more inclined towards an experience of the craft rather than just the purchasing of the product itself. Therefore, innovation, digitalization, and sustainability come to the forefront. This year's conference, organized by WCCE, is aligned with the European Year of Skills and how in the context of craft we need to rethink, adapt, and preserve in order to stay relevant in the 21st century. WCCE have come up with an excellent program, which we are super happy to host today, with key speakers having expertise in different areas: core craft skills and creativity, Ms. Gloria Bonet, digitalization and technology, Professor Stefano Micelli, and sustainability and ecology, Dr. Phillips. We encourage all of you to listen attentively, as these are important issues to think about. Moreover, we also encourage you to debate and challenge the ideas to be brought over today to bring new perspectives to the conversation and thereby making the most of our discussion here today for the benefit of our sector. Thanks a lot.
Good morning, dear all in presence and virtually. Thank you to be here. Thank you to be with us. It's a pleasure to start with the second international conference organized by World Craft Council Europe in the framework of the Crafting the Future project, co-funded by the EU in the Creative Europe program. As Elton Micallef, that I thank for the wonderful organization of our GA this year, he said we will talk about new skills for the craft sector, upskills, reskills, and all we can suggest to our craft people to be adapted to the new times, to the new markets. Of course, we won't forget their technical skills, their capacities to work with materials, with raw material, transforming them with their creativity, with their skills, once again, because we are in the year of the skill, European year of the skill. So we think that we need to discuss about new strategy for craft and new competencies. Of course, a craftsman, a craftwoman cannot do everything by himself or herself, but they need to understand what's going on, to be aware of the new trends, of the new opportunities that technology, digital technology, but not only them, can offer to their profession, to their activities, and also to be aware about sustainability. Sustainability cannot be perceived just like a rule. It must be perceived also as an opportunity to grow up with their businesses. And it will be our effort to help craft people around Europe to be more skilled with these new skills, capacities, and to understand better the new world in which all of us are living now. So thank you to be here. I don't want to take too much time to our key speakers, and I leave the floor. So thank you once again on the behalf of WCCE Europe. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Good morning. I'm Nikki Dewar from Crafts Council UK. I'm Vice President of World Crafts Council Europe, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers this morning. Our first speaker is joining us online. Manuela Prina is Head of Skills Identification and the Development Unit at the European Training Foundation. And we're really pleased that she's given our keynote today. Manuela uses the work that her EU agency does is supporting countries outside the EU in all matters relating to developing people. That's lifelong learning and skills. So can we all put our hands together and welcome Manuela online? Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. I hope you hear me well. If you can give me just a sign from the room that all is fine. Okay. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting the European Training Foundation to join you. I'm very sorry I cannot be there live, even if I would have really loved to be with you to enjoy this conference and to deep dive in a discussion that is not only very dear to the work that the European Training Foundation is doing, but it's also very dear to me personally. And I will tell you this personal story in a moment. I would like to share, some words regarding the European Training Foundation. I guess most of you don't know us. ETF is an agency of the European Union working in particular outside the EU. We work with 28 countries in the neighborhood and also Central Asia to support reforms in the area of human capital, in particular education and training and labor market reforms. We are involved with the European Union in many projects, looking at many different sectors and really trying to support boosting skills for the future in the context, of course, in the year of skills, to ensure that countries have the skills necessary to embrace economic development that is centered around inclusion, sustainability, and the green and digital transition, but also in particular to make sure that this future matches also with the benefit for people, to construct a society which is really based on European values, where individuals, the respect for individuals, their aspiration and their potential is fully taken into account. So the year of skills comes in a moment that is very important for all countries of the world. It's important for the European Union. It's important also for our neighbors. Why? Because it comes after the wave of the pandemic that has been hitting really, really hard all economic sectors. And this means hitting people. So we know that citizens all over the world have issues that are related really to reintegrating the labor market. But on the other side, we have employers looking for skills that they don't find available. And we are in a moment where we have to accelerate our attention on skills and make sure we pose the right questions to embrace all sectors of the economy and all talents that we have in our societies. And this is why the ETF has decided really in the middle of the pandemic to work and focus its attention in particular on crafts in a moment where our attention on skills, and I guess you read also from the newspapers, is very much focused on sectors drastically impacted by today's events, but also technological changes like energy, construction, you can name it. So why to look into crafts? What is that is there at stake? There are a few motivations that brought us to this focus in our work that we started in 2020. And in particular, one is related to talents, to make sure that we really embrace a discussion on skills that looks at all talents that we have in our societies and all professions that build not only competitiveness, and of course, what we have to do to pass to a green economy, but also that we look at our humanity, at our communities, at our belonging. And craft is central to this meaning that we have in telling the story of what our societies are. So in a moment where we have many discussions on skills, it is important that we also talk about the skills of humans, the skills of storytelling, and craft is a story that is told across generations and that tells the story of communities, of humanities. And this is something that we want to make sure stays with us and it's not forgotten. The second motivation that brought us to focus our attention on crafts and skills is exactly how young people are developing. I guess some of you will have children or will have anyway young people around you. And there are, I think, some considerations that we can make. The first is the distance that we take every day more and more from using our hands, and the value of crafting, that is not only the value of crafting an object, is what happens through that in the life of an individual, is the ability to make associations, to observe, to translate something in a meaning. And this is for us something which is important when we look into pedagogy and when we look at how we actually raise the future generation. But it's also the meaning of a value that we translate in objects and in choices of people. So if we look at the choices of young people, of fast consuming food, objects, fashion, and anything that they have, this is actually very different from a society that embraces a sustainable and an inclusive way of living, which is what the European Union brings forward as a fundamental value that we want to embrace and build. So craft is actually part of skilling our future generation and bringing them in a space of values and meaning, which is now very difficult to be supported as we look at our societies and communities. The third motivation that brought us to work more on craft is the observation, in particular in our partner countries, so countries outside the EU that enjoy less, and I think there is an acceleration now, thanks also with the collaboration with the World Craft Council and many other partners that I will share in a moment, that the craft sector is subject to less attention in terms of potential, in terms of contribution, not only to the economies, but to the building the communities in the countries. So while we recognize the potential of craft, there is still a lot of work to do to transform this potential in actual actions and in actual vision for the future. And these are, this is a consideration that we have been substantiating with a lot of evidence, with in-depth studies in many countries outside the EU that offered us the opportunity to open a space of dialogue and reflection on the sector that goes from the financial incentives to the recognition of masters and to how the craft is actually embedded in a vision also for skills development and for a future generation embracing these professions and its potentials for the future. So let me share with you some of our learning and what we are bringing forward and why craft is of particular importance when we look at the future of skills. First of all, craft is associated with excellence, and excellence is a pillar of our year of skills, but it's also a pillar of the skills agenda in Europe. And you know, and I think the work that you do in the council and all the work that you do at national level has excellence really as an important feature that characterizes the sector and the transmission of these elements to the future generation. The second element that I already mentioned is values. And we are in a moment in history where values are really in danger. So crafts for us is really part of the solution, and it's part of a vision of humanity that we want to bring forward. The third point is the community, is the localization, is the value for traditions and also for communities' identities. In a world which is more and more globalized, this does not mean that we should give up on identities and on storytelling that bring forward the value of humans and of diversity and unicity of our communities. We have engaged in a partnership with several actors. The World Craft Council is one of them, but we have also around the table UNESCO, UNIDO, which is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization that is focusing on design industries in particular, the Union for Mediterranean, but also associations like the Michelangelo Foundation and many schools that are focusing on crafts. And we have reflected together on what is important for the future. And soon we will release a joint publication that I would be happy to share with all of you. In this work that we are finalizing, we see a few priorities that I think are also part of your agenda for the conference. The first is the importance of looking at data. So because craft is also characterized by micro experiences and individuals, it's very difficult to have the power of data to also make sure that we have policy orientations and we persuade to go in a direction compared to another. So it's very important that we look at the power of data and bringing this together. And I think that your conference is exactly also part of this action. The second is education and skills, and I'm very happy that you have dedicated the conference to this topic, is how the skills dimension is really to be transformed and not to be seen as a different itinerary as compared to general education, because education today needs crafts. Needs craft for pedagogy, needs craft to form the future of youth, needs craft to bring forward the values that we want for the society and humanity of the future. The third point is advocacy. I think we don't get tired to talk about crafts and the value of crafts in our daily life. I don't get tired of it, so I keep saying that crafts will really save our world, and I really mean it. And of course, we also have to look at economic incentives. We know how many professions are at risk of disappearing, how many abilities and how many crafts are really at risk of disappearing because they are not supported and because there is not attention that is given to this. And finally, we look also at virtuous supply chains to make sure that there is a recognition of crafts and there is also a equity in terms of value of crafts all over the world. So let me conclude with just I would say, a vision that is also linked to my personal story. As I've been traveling around the world, really literally almost in every continent, and I've seen so many countries. And in many countries, I saw crafts and masters doing amazing things and being passionate, especially of crafts related to embroidery. I think I collected really an amazing number of pieces of art and crafts around the world. But what surprised me everywhere, I remember in a school, in Georgia, I saw a pile of these beautiful crafted objects that were made by students together with the masters, and there was nothing done with them. And I was discussing with the school director, and she was saying, well, I don't know what to do with them. While I had, I don't know, at least 10 different ideas of what to do with them. So recognizing this potential and recognizing not only the potential for the community and the recognition of this mastery for people, but also recognizing the economic potential that this could bring to a community and to its different other sectors that, you know, bring value and also economic value to the community. I started to think that we really need to get serious about it. And this is why I really invited the European associations to look more at the collaboration with countries outside Europe, because I strongly believe that this is something that will bring our humanity in the future. And if I can conclude with the idea of peace, I'm sure that in the future, if we give the word in the hands of craft people, we will solve conflicts in a different way. And I'm sure this will be a story that will be told also by Ukraine in the near future when peace will come. So thank you for hosting us, and I wish you really a great discussion, and I look forward to also know the results of your discussion to use these also in our work of the future. Thank you to all of you, and thanks to the World Council for inviting ETF.
Thank you so much, Manuela. I think the words ringing in my ears from that are that crafts can save the world. I think that's what we all heard. So I think that's what we're all here. I think with a bit more collaboration and perhaps a little bit more joined upness, we can definitely do that. And I think the conversations we've been having the last couple of days with World Crafts Council Europe members and the people that we've got today in the room is such a great starting point for that greater collaboration, for thinking about how important storytelling, skills, the next generation are in tackling the unprecedented challenges that we're facing. So Manuela, thank you again for such an inspirational and call to action. I think we can really sort of take forward throughout today. So thank you.
Thanks to you. Have a nice day.
I'd like to now move to our first keynote, and I would like to welcome Gloria Bonet to the stage. Gloria is going to discuss core craft skills and creativity. Gloria is a researcher, a designer, a teacher, and the short cycle coordinator at Escola Massana, if I say that right, at Barcelona, which is Barcelona's Art and Design Centre. The centre has a really fascinating philosophy that really makes sure that interdisciplinary and symbiosis of art and design is in everything they do. So Gloria, welcome to our conference.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor, and it's my first time in Malta, and I want to say that it's a lovely, lovely city. I've seen only the small streets around, and I hope that today I'm gonna be able to have a walk around. Thank you very much. I really like how Manuela ended her speech about saving the world, and I was imagining, like, I think that in every sector, in every congress, for example, I don't know, dentists, they finish with, I know that dentists can save the world, and that's really nice, because I think that amongst everyone, all of us, we are going to save the world, dentists and craftsmen together, and maybe painters, I don't know. But it's a good idea to think that we in our corner can do something for our society. And now I would like to speak about how to help students of arts and craft and design, because in my school we work with this hybrid combination of skills, art, craft, and design, and how will help them to make their mission real. So I've been teaching, and I've been in the direction team of the Escola Massana for more than 15 years. So I've seen a lot of students, and I'm gonna try to give you some clues on how to make it work. And my speech is gonna be in 2 parts. So the first part is how to do it, and the second one is how not to do it. So you can leave at the half of my speech, because the second part is don't do that, please. I'd like to start with a quote, if you don't mind, that is not mine, but this is the thesis of my conference, experts versus technicians. And now I will explain the difference between them. The quote is not mine, is a colleague, Oscar Guayabero, who is a curator of arts and craft located in Barcelona. And he said once, we need experts. We have plenty of technicians. Experts acquire knowledge from experience. The experience gives them clues to solve contingencies. Technicians learn formulas and do not conceive the existence of error, which is why they do not know how to react when error occurs. So, speaking about this quote, I'd like to tell you a small anecdote. I have a friend who was working with Cirque du Soleil, the circus, for a few years. And once Cirque du Soleil landed in Japan for a show. As I said, technicians have recipes. They follow recipes. And when Cirque du Soleil appeared in Japan, local Japanese employees were hired. In the world of circus, although everything is very calculated, there are usually unforeseen events. The Japanese employees, as you could imagine, they try to be really efficient, and they ask for an instruction manual on how to act if in case of unforeseen events. But there was no such a manual. An unforeseen event cannot be foreseen. And this is the difference between a technician and an expert. Expert can face an unforeseen event, technicians cannot. The gap between technicians and experts is creativity. And that's how we lace together this equation between skills and creativity. And of course, there's always this open debate about if creativity has been learned. This is the end of the speech, if creativity can be learned or not. So at the end, maybe crafts are not as different as circus life. So you have to be an expert if you want to solve problems and if you want to be a real craftsman. And I'm gonna try to explain 10 basic things that you need to manage if you want to be a craftsman. Yes, when someone is an artisan, needs to work with a lot of skills, and at the end you become like a juggler, managing lots of instruments together, and skills and capacity. The first thing that an artisan needs to know is to set strategic goals. In the society of abundance of products, the strategy of producers to sell their goods is super segmentations of targets. Most of the artisans have limited productions, but that does not mean that they are only used to supply a local market. You don't have to be a big company to sell worldwide. If you have a really segmentation target, maybe you need to find your specific target abroad. Maybe you don't have a lot of your micro segmentation near you. And you don't have to be really big, because e-commerce, you know, now is approachable. Just data. 95 million people use Etsy in 2021 to buy or sell items. The next skill, improve the product by applying innovation and design. Designing is asking yourself again and again, what if we change something? What if we try something? This is the difference between technicians and experts again and again. A technician never poses himself this question. They follow the formula. Experts always are asking, what if we make some changes? Even objects that were best made in their day are no longer appealing because the client or the context has changed. A product is not justified by being handmade or by the fact that it is always been done that way. Financial, yeah, we need to talk about money also. I have a friend. I had a coffee with him the day before yesterday, and he told me, yes, we need some financial intelligence. I like this way of thinking. Financial intelligence. We talk a lot about emotional intelligence, but financial intelligence, when you have a small structure, is a good skill to know, because when you make an investment in a small structure, the charge of these resources can be slow. It will take years. So you need to be really intelligent in terms of financing. Yeah, get some good company in your travel, in your voyage. The great majority of craft companies in my country are small. This forces the same craftsman to end up making everything, which is a mistake. Associate is also a good way to share expenses and above all to grow in size and resources. Yeah, Manuela, Prina just told us about this. Craft customers want to have less, but of higher quality. She was pointing this, accumulating is so outdated. It's a 20th century attitude from the past. Crafts are capable of giving objects a dose of durability. The communication and the image that some craft products develop. Society receives very unclear, even contradictory signals and messages about what crafts are. So having this consistency in terms of image is not always easy. You need to select your point to communicate, because the good, nice, and cheap does not exist altogether. Yeah, opinion leaders. A good photo can spark the interest of a journalist. Opinion leaders today are more approachable. The social networks have upset the old hierarchies. Accessibility is a value on the rise. Craft are a tool, not a purpose. Craft by itself is not a value. If an object does not satisfy the consumer, it will not matter if it is handmade or not, because craft is not the final objective. It's just a tool. Something else, eco-responsibility. I think that we're going to talk about this later, but let me say that we must take advantage of the natural associations of crafts. These values, such as sustainability, responsibility, decrease, recycling, biodegradation, zero impact, they work very well with crafts. And I think the end of this is searching for quality. As Manuela Prina just told us, she was talking about excellence. This is the clue. There are more than 100 companies in Spain, for example, dedicated to offering premium products or services. The artisans should have access to this cluster and know their needs. And okay, let's start with the second part of my conference. How not to do it, how not to fall, how not to lose it. Don't improvise. What is required today of the artisan is a high level of specialization. No one will be able to improvise as a craftsman. Being a craftsman is not leisure time, because there is nothing farther from craftsmanship than handicrafts. We need to avoid the image of victimism, of survivors. Artisans should not believe that the world is indebted to them for being guardians of certain traditional techniques or knowledge. I'm getting hard here, sorry. The cliché that the artisan is a second-class artist must be put away. Even the most refined handcrafted items are not meant to be works of art. Another thing is that they can have, of course, artistic value, but they are made for real life. As Richard Sennett says in the book, The Craftsman, we can only achieve a more humane material life if we understand better the production of things. Luckily, with handcrafted objects, the subject is capable of experiencing a deeper and more lasting emotional relationship with those manufactured not industrially. In general, the artisans make pieces several times unique, without any being a copy of the other. For the artisan, the authentic should not be what is unique or exclusive, but what is faithful to its origin, what does not lie about its essence. I like to think that our capacity of speaking is also our capacity of thinking about everything. And we cannot impoverish our language, because you cannot appreciate something that you don't know. If we can talk better about craft, we will be able to think better about craft. The linguistic poverty, the inaccuracies, cause a precarious transmission of meaning and values. We don't need to lower a price, because by lowering the price of a product, the product is not going to be best sell. Simply, the product is relocated, but it is not more attractive for this. Craft can only be competitive and profitable by maintaining high standards and not by sacrificing them to lower prices. We have been hearing for decades that this or that is design, assuming that everything that is design has been produced industrially, and for that piece is better. When precisely in these author's pieces, in design pieces, is where the greater intervention of craftsmanship is. And don't do it alone. The craftsman must receive the necessary training to communicate with specialists from other disciplines. The degree of specialization that postmodern society demands makes the Renaissance figure of the total humanist scientist hardly credible. A craftsman cannot know how to do everything, but he must learn to collaborate and discuss with others. Craftsmanship is not incompatible with technology, as the designer and architect Andrea Branzi would say when he talks about the new craft. This craft serves as a privileged laboratory for the industry. I like to see it like if craftsmanship is to design what haute couture is to prêt-à-porter or ready-to-wear sector. And now I'm gonna quote myself, if I may. As I said before, the gap between experts and technicians is creativity. And I assure you that there are a lot of manual for Japanese and for everybody about how to be creative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gloria. There's some themes emerging already, aren't there? I think that idea of collaboration, the idea of resilience, the idea of what if is starting to appear, which I think is really interesting. I really like that idea of juggling. I think all of us now in this room probably can absolutely connect with that element of the juggling that we do day to day to support the craftsmen and the craft sectors that we look after. Before I introduce our next speaker, I wanted to ask if we have any questions for Gloria. Gloria, you've stunned us all into thinking. So perhaps at lunch and the coffee breaks, we will come back to you. So I am going to move on to our next keynote presenter. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Professor Stefano Micelli, who is a really good friend of World Crafts Council Europe. So really pleased to have you back with us in Malta. Stefano is an academic, an economist, and works in Venice, where he teaches economics and business management at the university there. Currently the president of Upskill 4.0, an organization that designs and develops technology and social innovation paths by bringing schools, businesses, and local authorities together. So Stefano, if we can hand over to you to talk to us about new skills and opportunities that are evolving around how to transition and acceleration of digitalization. Thank you.
Yep, I have to go down. Yeah, okay. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for this opportunity to share some ideas, thought, experiences. I think Gloria made a tremendous presentation. You know, it made my presentation a bit more complicated. I don't have slides as elegant as hers. I have to admit that I was very much, surprised by the beauty, the elegance of her slides. At the same time, she made my presentation a lot easier because the last slide that she presented is a great introduction to my speech. You remember, technology is not against craftsmanship. It sounded like you probably put it in a much more elegant way, but this is the concept, and this is the topic of my presentation today. I have been asked by Elisa, Guidi, not only to kind of provide you with some original thoughts, I hope, about how technology and digital tools shaped craft during the last 15, 20 years, but also Elisa asked me to present, I hope this will be interesting, a case study that I've been involved in the last 3 years, a case study that introduced some elements of innovation in the implementation of digital culture and digital tools in craftsmanship in Italy. I know that this is just an an Italian project. This is just an Italian experience, but I think it has some elements that could be easily generalized all around Europe. And I hope they will be worth your attention. Let me start by making a consideration. Let me figure out whether Manuela Prina made a very rich introduction, and she emphasized in her speech two aspects that I would like to underline in my opening. First of all, she said, if we do care about craftsmanship, it is because we do believe that in our society, especially young people, do have a variety of talents. We do have different forms of intelligence. Some people are very gifted in mathematics, formal languages. Other people are more comfortable with using their hands, working in a different environment. Manuela made a point, emphasizing that the point that we have to provide all these young people an opportunity. We have to provide them with the opportunity to express this talent. And in that perspective, from an individual point of view, craftsmanship is a tremendous opportunity to promote this variety of forms of intelligence. At the same time, she said, this is not just an individual aspect. This is a collective form of intelligence. If we do promote that kind of talent, we will connect society in a different way. If we do believe in strong communities, well, we will invest in craftsmanship, individual and the society. Let me add another aspect. In the last 15 years, economists have been thinking about craftsmanship as a source of economic development. That was not the case for many, many years. We thought about craftsmanship as a remain, as a relic, as a community, obviously, not me necessarily, but economists in general thought about craftsmanship as something from the past. And I wanted to go back to this very important article written by Chris Anderson, who has been the famous editor of Wired, the Bible of Innovation, for many, many years. An article that was published more than 10 years ago now, in 2010. An article that made a point, that expressed a very bold statement. The protagonist, this was his idea, the protagonist of this next revolution, what we call now Industry 4.0, just to simplify, the protagonist was not supposed to be the large enterprise, the large company, the large conglomerate. Rather, it was supposed to be a new generation of craftsmen, a new generation of craft people capable of coupling the traditional craft talent with a new generation of tools that existed for a long time, but were made available from an economic point of view, from a technological point of view, were very available at a very reasonable price during the first decade of this century. We are talking about a number of tools that coupled, the web and all the, communication technologies we're all acquainted with. A new set of tools that we figured out were finally inexpensive and easy to use. I'm talking about, all technologies that we're all familiar with now: 3D printing, laser cutting, CNC machinery, collaborative robots, IoT. Now I would add also artificial intelligence, even though at that time, 15 years ago, artificial intelligence was not even nearly as, as popular as it is now. Obviously, GPT-3 now made this technology definitely, very easy to use and very inexpensive. All these technologies coupled with the potential of World Wide Web, of the internet, provided us with a tremendous opportunity to launch a new economic phase, a new economic revolution that had new protagonists, as I said. And this is an example. This is Jay Rogers. This is the founder of Local Motors. This is something that, 15 years ago, we all discussed about. This is, Jay Rogers with, this fancy, beautiful, ugly car, depends on you. This is a new way of building cars. They are custom-made cars. All the components are bought online. You can actually buy components, in the car industry rather easily. And, the owner of this Local Motors company, a craftsman, as you can see. I mean, it's a very familiar, let me say, environment. In Italian, you would say officina is a craft laboratory. It looks like, one of those planches from the, D'Alembert Diderot encyclopedia, very calm, very, very, enjoyable place to work at. Just to go back, this Jay Roger, could count on a very reactive and proactive community of consumers that used to give him plenty of feedback about the quality of the cars he used to produce, how to improve the, the aesthetics, how to improve the mechanics, and so on. So that was the model. This is what Chris Anderson had in mind. Let me go back to Italy. I don't want to speak about other situations all around Europe. Let me say something about Italy. Did we experience a multiplication, a multiplying effect of this crossing, this junction between new technologies and craftsmanship? Did we see many Rogers popping up in Italy? I would say yes. I would say we had a generation of, traditional craftsmen, joining forces with innovators, with digital technicians and experts. But the phenomenon was not as relevant as Chris Anderson anticipated. Obviously, we in Italy, we can count on the luxury, filiere. We know how important is craftsmanship just to sustain and support the competitive advantage of many luxury groups, luxury brands. But we had a hard time, seeing many J. Rogers. By the way, we have them, in the Motor Valley, there are plenty of these people nearby Modena and Bologna. But, we had some difficulties in multiplying these opportunities. And here is the problem. We don't have enough digital skills. In Italy, we do have a huge problems in providing a young generation, but also an older generation with innovative digital skills. This is the Digital Economy and Society Index. This is a document which is provided by the European Commission every year. It measures, the state of the art in every single country as regards the diffusion, the adoption of digital competences. And let me be a bit more specific. Look at the human capital. Look at the human capital aspect. If we don't have too many J. Rogers in Italy, if we were not able to join forces between craftsmanship and digital experts, going back to Gloria's points of view, it's because we didn't invest enough, at least according to official statistics, to digital skills in the last 15, 20 years. This is what this document says. This is becoming a huge issue in Italy. These are, let me say, some of the articles that I've been reading during the last 6 months. I'm sure Elisa Guidi could mention 10 more and 20 more, Costanza, 30 more. You know, we are now bombarded with this issue. We now realize how important it is to invest in this digital skill, but catching up is not easy. And even though this issue is becoming a national public concern, it is not easy to, you know, implement solutions that will allow us to, you know, to step forward, you know, in a decisive way. Let me say that there are two different scenarios here that are actually competing one against the other. On the one hand, we have, you know, large corporations that are trying to make an investment and capture, let me say so, young, talented profiles that could contribute to their future economy. There's a huge investment right now in what we call in-house academies, you know, academia, internal academies, and this is quite relevant because the employer branding of many of these corporations is very strong. So if Ferrari, for instance, is looking for some talented digital expert, the HR expert, the HR person of that company, of Ferrari, will be facing not too many problems, let's say so. Some other companies, high-tech companies, are now dealing with open innovation, you know, solutions. Many of these open innovation contests are not necessarily oriented. They are not looking at extraordinary innovation. They are looking for talented pools of, you know, human resources. You might be interested in buying a new solution of a new idea, of a new technology, but actually you're buying 4 or 5 people that might contribute in a determinate way to the, you know, future of a business unit, of a part of your company. Problem is for SMEs, and European policies, at least in Italy, do not represent the final solution. As you know, regards Italy, I don't want to express a more general point of view. There's a document that has been published by OECD containing an evaluation of these, you know, the impact of these digital innovation hubs, which is a bit more problematic than expected. You know, we thought about, you know, SMEs, craft-based firms, you know, we thought that they could refer to these institutional hubs in a different way. We expected so, but well, they proved not to be the right reference, at least according to the documentation we have collected so far. So let me say very, very clearly, we need to find alternative ways. I want to, you know, Gloria started with what to do and concluded with what not to do. I will try to do the opposite, you know, making a point about what we did in Venice after 10 years, let me say 10 years of experimentation. We decided to create a spin-off. This is the constructive part of my speech. I do it, I know, I'm a bit hesitant. I know that I'm talking about a project that I've been carrying on with my university, so will be a bit cautious. I will try to explain how it works. I know that it is hard to kind of express, an evaluation about something that I have been involved in since the beginning. But just let me just tell you how it works. This spin-off is an organization which has been clearly officially supported by the university. It is part of the university, at least for 5 years. Then, it has to move on with no additional support. It connects, on the one hand, Italian SMEs, not with technicians, just to go back to the point, but with ITS. ITS is Istituti Tecnici Superiori. It's the Italian tertiary vocational training infrastructure. We didn't have community colleges in Italy for a long time. We didn't have BTS in France. We didn't have Fachhochschule in Germany. We set them up 15 years ago. Now we are trying to connect these vocational training programs with SMEs, with craft-based SMEs, asking for some specific grants that have been provided by private foundation and regions. This is how the mechanism works. Not too complicated. From a very practical point of view, we do identify a portion of regional territory, a province. What in Italy is a province. We usually ask 10, 20 craft-based firms to participate to a training program and elaborate on a number of issues that do represent a very important agenda, at least according to what we have studied so far. This is called the warm-up. At the end of the story, some of these firms decided to, identify a problem they would like to work on. On the other side, we identify a group of 4, 5, 6 students that mentored, supervised by a specialist, worked together with a firm for 5, 6 months in order to develop an innovative solution, a prototype. At the end of the story, there's a final event. I want to stress that because innovation is not an individual effort. It is always a collective effort. You need to see that your neighborhood, the business you've been competing with for many years, is doing something. And the fact that everybody's moving forward makes the difference, at least at the territorial level. So this is how it works. And let me say one aspect. This is very important also for students. If we don't want to create technicians, if we want to create experts, we need to emphasize some soft skills that are usually, forgotten in the technician training programs. We emphasize I will use Gloria's, terminology, vocabulary. Technicians are usually, formed according to a discipline-based program. I do math, I do physics, I do chemistry, I do whatever it is. I do marketing, production, whatever. What we intended to focus on is the challenge-based learning. I set up a problem, which is the company's problem, and then you start elaborating. You start from the problem, going back, to the disciplines you need, to the knowledge base you need to, to put in use. Not individual. Technicians are usually, trained to take exams on a very solitary basis. Now, this is not the way, we look at education and training. We we emphasize collective learning. We focus on soft skills rather than on hard skills. And this is why we made an investment on this methodology, which is an innovation management methodology used by large digital corporation. We use more or less the same steps in order to implement innovation in craft-based firms, design thinking. I'm sure you're all familiar with design thinking, so I will not spend too many words, but it's a very powerful methodology that one aspect starts with empathy. This is probably the most radical transformation we asked our students to adopt. Do not take a brief and just start writing notes and formulas. Going back to the previous presentation, just talk to these people, try to understand what they have in mind, try to understand why they have a headache before going to bed. What is the problem that they have in mind, and let's understand together how we can solve it. On the one hand, we have firms. On the other hand, we have students. Think that today our 20-something-year-old people are not fascinated by craft necessarily. Some of them do not even know that craft exists. And this connection creates a very interesting short circuit, a virtuous short circuit, because some of these people do understand that some of the mestieri that we had in Italy are still very relevant, and they're still part of our economic effort. Some numbers, just because I would like to you to know that this is not a generic experiment. We already had 90 projects going on. This is the geography of the firms. So you see that we have been able to cover more or less all the Italian peninsula. Let me stress the fact that in Italy, we have more craft-based firms in the north. This is not a judgment at all, but just for you to know. And we've been able to involve them 15 of these community colleges, of these ITS, which are now growing, are being part of a national education agenda. What are the keywords? What are the industries that we've been working with in the last 2 years? Fashion, mechanics, furniture, food, tourism, sustainable tourism, which is an oxymoron, but well, we tried to do that. We've been dealing with a number of different technologies. The technologies I started the presentation with are not necessarily at the top in the top list of the technologies of these SMEs, of these craft-based firms. Today, I would say that augmented reality, virtual reality, this is probably what excites firms the most. But obviously, we're dealing with additive manufacturing, with e-commerce. One aspect that I would like to go back to at the beginning of this presentation, our Maltese friend said, we're moving from craft product to craft experience. This is something that we've been very much working on, leveraging on digital technologies. Just to give you the flavor of it, just to be very concrete, 3 quick stories about what happens. Here is something about the process. This is Pegoretti. Dario Pegoretti is a bicycle maker, tremendous brand. If you want to know, many pop stars, many sportmen, they go to Dario Pegoretti bicycle shop in Verona. It's kind of a very famous place. 15 people, very small, craft-based. They make custom bicycles like the one that you see. They're very peculiar, also from an aesthetic point of view. they don't find people that are interested in welding anymore. And welding is crucial here because you have this steel tubes and you have to put them together, creating frames. And this is why they asked our students how to make it easier for welders, to perform activities that have been very complicated, especially for young and inexperienced people. Instead of automatizing, creating a sort of a robots like many firms did in other parts of Europe, these students created, and you can see it here, a mask, augmented reality mask. So you see the frame, but you have some additional elements while you look at the tubes, at the frame. And already when you're moving with your welding equipment, when you're moving on, how much pressure, how much energy you have to put in order to obtain the results you're looking for. This idea makes the whole process much easier, and it makes the training of these welding personnel much easier in the future. Instead of having a 4 or 5 years training process just to have an expert, you spend 1 year and you have more or less the same result. This is fundamental because young 20-year-old people do not enjoy staying there for 4 or 5 people, and the Pegoretti personnel were very much concerned with the identification, with the selection process of new talented people. An interesting story because these students fully understood the importance of maintaining the process craft-based. They realized immediately, talking to Pegoretti personnel, they immediately realized that they had to preserve the authenticity of the process, because this is why people like Ben Harper do come from the United States just to spend 1 week and see how their bicycle is actually manufactured. Again, here, Bottega Nova, I'm sure you're familiar with this very famous artistic tile district. Bottega Nova, they are fantastic manufacturer. They're not necessarily good sellers. And they used to have very hard time discussing with architects. They produce these very sophisticated, original, peculiar tiles. They're very small, and usually the problem is how to imagine their impact on a wall, on a surface, in a hotel, in a public environment, and so on. This was kind of an easy task. We created with students from Bologna, we created an app that very, simplified dramatically the way, an architect can just, identify the potential of these tiles on a large surface. This is, augmented reality. It was not complicated from a technological point of view. The result was dramatic in the way, the manufacturer, which is a very artistic person, profoundly artistic. It was dramatic in the way, this person, again, 15 people working in this shop, the way they started discussing with architects. And, that was a real improvement in commercial terms, in the way you establish a dialogue with your clientele. Let me go to the third example. This is something I tried myself. This is Ramos Salso, an interesting shop in Venice. I wanted to conclude with my city. We have plenty of clothes. We have plenty of suits, especially, people my age. We have plenty of suits like this, and we don't know what to do. We need to learn how to declutter our houses, our spaces, and we usually don't do it because we tend to remain attached to some of the garments that we bought in the past. We use them, we fell in love with them. Now they are no longer interesting. They are no longer compliant with fashion, with current fashion. Ramos also takes care of that. This is a very fine craft, original, oriented to sustainability, business. And they rearrange your suits. They change them. It's radical, as you can see here. I mean, they change the shape and they change the interior. I think it's interesting. The idea is powerful. The market is there. There are plenty of people eager to play the game. I did it myself. We had several experiments. But what was totally wrong was the experience. You bring your stuff, you don't know how much you will pay, you don't know how much time this process will require, you don't have any feedback about the materials that they will use. And so what we learned, discussing with them, is that we had to insert some digital aspects, some digital ingredients in dealing with the complexity of the experience as a whole. The whole experience has been radically transformed. And now you go to Ramos also, and you have obviously an offline impact, but also a number of digital touch points that have been reinvented. Again, these students reshape the whole process. Again, these students were very much in touch with this person in a way that probably academics would have never been. I mean, it's, I'm a professor. I'm not as nice as those students, definitely. And they've been very collaborative. They've been explaining to this person who has more or less my age, they've been explaining to him why it is so important to have digital feedbacks, for instance, continuous digital feedback. Well, I could continue, but it's time to close. These are the, let me say, takeaways that I've learned from these 2-3 years. I usually say 2 years, but it's a 3 year. The problem is that we had in 2020, we had the pandemic, so we didn't do that much at all. First of all, let me say, large segments of SMEs are today left without adequate support. It is very complicated to create a link between these young, talented digital experts with these businesses. And the competition is tough, especially today, because large corporations are more and more concerned in capturing those talents. And we need to create connections in a very original way. The alliance with tertiary vocational training has proved to be very effective in Italy, much more than the alliance with the university. This is also because these technicians are very much into prototyping, which is one of the aspects that I mentioned before, is one of those items in the design thinking process, but it is also a key ingredient in this revolution that Chris Anderson identified at the beginning of the speech. You remember the Wired article. Let me express one point very, very, very clearly, and I hope Manuela, Prina, we will have a chat on this. Virtuous short circuits can be achieved only by implementing innovative pedagogies. There's no way 5 young, brilliant, talented students can contribute to the success of a craft-based firm without a strict control on the process. This is something I want to tell you. If you think that just the overlap of these two situations can produce any virtuous effect? Well, far away. On the contrary, it can be very conflictual. Let me say that we've been stressing, the use and the adoption, the strict implementation of a methodology, because we understood immediately how dangerous it can be, just the free floating of this. And we also can tell you that design thinking has proved to be tremendously useful in managing these procedures. Let me conclude with the social implication. Manuela, Prina expressed that point, and I would like to go back to that. Not only we saw, the economic impact of bringing 5, 6 talented students in a craft shop, we saw also social recognition. Just one point. When we went to Pegoretti the first time, Pegoretti is a very traditional business. There are these people that weld tubes, frames, and so on. And there was this brilliant Sicilian student that said, I'm truly impressed. I'm now, my father used to do more or less the same job, and I got ashamed of what he has done in the past. I wanted to be a technician. I wanted to learn formulas. I didn't want to do things with my hands. But now that I see how brilliant these people are, now that I see how important their clientele is, I fully understand that my dad was not doing something irrelevant. I'm proud of what he has done, and he has actively contributed to the production of that prototype, to that mask in augmented reality. This, reconnection, this effort to put together, social, and cultural elements in our society, especially in Italy, this is something that we have to make an effort, to do, and to do it now. I think this is a social exercise. This is a tremendously powerful tool to reconnect parts of our society that do not understand each other at all, really to foster and promote this mutual social recognition. At least in Italy, this is, I think, something very relevant to do. Thank you very much for your attention.
Does anybody have questions for Stefano? Or we have one there. Lovely.
Hi, I'm Lorna Mansell. I'm half of a team which is based here in Malta called Tara Lois Jewellery. I'm set up a business with my daughter, who went through an awful lot of the education that you've discussed. She started in France, where we used to live, learning jewellery. She studied in London at the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, learning the technical skills to be a technician. And then she went to the University of Dundee to study jewellery and metal design. She studied here in Malta with a master in filigree making. And she has a lot of the expertise that you've been discussing, which is that innovation, the use of technology, and everything else. And I know we're discussing new skills here today, but I'd just like to make a point to the educators in the room. My daughter has no business skills. She can't do a set of accounts. She's just done recently a business course run by, I think it's the Design and Graph Council of Ireland. And whilst, yes, I think it's absolutely critical, you do focus on the new skills and how to help the craftspeople export, broaden their horizons, think innovatively and creatively. I am absolutely for it, but please don't forget the old skills, the basic skills, because otherwise they come into the world and they can't work. They can't run a business. So that would be my point. Thank you very much.
I totally buy your point of view. I honestly, I understand it 100%. One aspect that and I would like to understand whether you are, you feel the same with me. I know I'm talking about very relevant subject, your daughter. What we experienced in these 3 years is that we should not overcharge, we should not overload, our craft people with requests. Once you know how to manage, your creative process, once you know how to identify your customers, one good thing is to find a companion, man or woman, and become business partner and do things together. This is my suggestion. The fact that one person can handle the complexity of doing business today is, it's seriously, it's overloading. It's not because I don't, I love small businesses, I love them, but I do believe that once you start managing, a process like jewelry, for instance, jewelry creation, immediately find a partner, business partner that could help you out in doing business properly, creating a proper balance sheet, a budget, covering financial aspects and all these things. I think this is what I told the last guy I mentioned. I said, you're creative, you know how to handle, the relationship with customers. You don't have, digital skills, but we can catch up. You have absolutely no control on your economic documentation. No, don't waste your time, learning that as well, because this is way too complicated and it will take too much time for you. Find one of my students here in Venice and give him some money, hire him and do things together, create a company. Otherwise, but obviously this is my fit or my not fit, to the situation of your daughter. But I think we should not overload, the craft profile, excessive requests. I think, once you're able to do your business, immediately start to grow, leveraging on partners, on people that want to do things with you. At the beginning, might sound a bit complicated, but then, I did apply that, professors do think they know to do things perfectly in every single domain. I said, no, every single step, I don't know how to cope with, I get an expert and things grow.
Yeah. So if I could interrupt, you're jumping to step 2 or 3. You can always employ somebody, but you have to have the revenue to do that.
Yeah.
She couldn't price her products.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She therefore was underpricing. Therefore, she had not got enough revenue. Therefore, she couldn't afford to hire somebody. So
I see.
Fundamentally, you need to step back to square 0 to go, what skills do they need to get to the point where they can hire somebody? I have no objections in hiring somebody else to do the accounts. I'd be more than happy to. But you need to take these things one step.
You need to have a kind of a picture.
If you do not have the funding of somebody behind you, most of these guys can't write a business plan. If they can't write a business plan, they can't get financing. So there is really a fundamental skill required in understanding how businesses operate. I agree, don't overburden it, because some of them will never be in business on their own, but at least give them a short introductory course so they've got some basics.
I buy your point.
Hi, it's Joy Vassallo from the Golden Glitch. It's a Mediterranean network for designers and makers. And I would like to add on this subject, actually, because our observation is that many of the new, craftspersons tend to go into crafts by starting their own thing. There seems to be a lack of will, maybe by large or mid-sized companies to allow people within the company to innovate within and grow. So I wanted to ask whether through your research, did you come across with such statistics where you see that new craftspersons equals new business people?
We saw this tendency, and we saw it is not as important as media sometimes suggest. You know, I leave the large corporation to open up my craft beer shop. You know, this is largely emphasized by media. In statistics, it is not as relevant, but these people are oftentimes more equipped to deal with those subjects. And they immediately realize how important it is to create those connections with professionals, with schools, with universities. They know how to handle all that. In Italy, let me express, this is a kind of a national issue. In Italy, the huge problem is a generation of 50, 60-year-old people that do have an exquisite, you know, competence in their domain. They know how to do jewelry, they know how to, you know, create garments and so on. And we need to readapt and make these people evolve in a way that their know-how is transferable to a new generation. Digital tools are formidable, you know, tools in order to provide that. I would have loved a much stronger cohort of people, you know, leaving their business, entering craft, you know, sectors with new ideas and with a stronger managerial approach. But this has not been the case. It is the case in large metropolitan areas like Milan. It is the case, not in, you know, in other regions in Italy. But I think it is a phenomenon that should be studied. I think this is a good hint, you know, for future research. Thank you.
I'm going to have to call it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Stefano. Thank you. I think that's got us set up for our next keynote speaker really well. We've been talking about innovation, teamwork. I love that notion of empathy, listening and talking and understanding and reconnection. And I think that we'll hear more about that from our next speaker, Dr. Rob Phillips. Rob is a product designer and a senior tutor at the RCA on the Design Products and Futures programs. His current project that he's working with in a large collaboration of partnerships is thinking about distributed design that fosters people's engagements in the natural worlds. His research seeks to engage design, decreasing our impact and gaining insights into sustainable transitions. I welcome Rob.
Thank you very much for this this honour and privilege to talk to you all. This is one of my first back in the real world since COVID. So it's pretty powerful and it's really lovely to see some faces. Also today I'm going to be sharing some work of my colleagues as well. So it's a great honour to be able to do that. I'm going to sort of start by looking at what I think craft is, a bit of background, what is ecological citizenship, to again situate things. Then how we need to move that ecological citizenship and craft. It will all make sense at the end. Quite often I go with my students on random spurious tangents and then I come back. That's just my manner, okay? And I will get there. I'd just like to acknowledge the whole team and thank them for all the work that they put into this, and I'll do that throughout. So first of all, what we're looking at and what we're talking about today is ecological citizens and ecological citizenship. And so what I mean by that is, traditionally, I think it was about, so I've taught in the RCA, the Royal College of Art in London, for about 8 years on the design products program. And we always say to our students, to our clients, actually, what is a product? What is it? How do you use it? How do you sell it? How do you apply it? How do you make that tangible? And I think it's really interesting to think about products as product service systems. Okay, they're touch points. They're no longer just a physical thing. They're interconnected. Okay, they might be digital, they might be downloadable, they might be directing someone, they might be about how you're building something, but they've got multiple touch points, as our previous speaker was talking about. So this is a project recently that we've been awarded about £3.6 million by the EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, based in the UK. And that's with Glendor and Stockholm Environmental Institute. And we're kind of a micro funding scheme. So we're part of a project to make projects, basically, to go, actually, what are the preferable futures of sustainability? Traditionally, quite often, sustainable practices, they have been bolt-ons. So, you know, many, many years ago, students turned to me and went, why don't you teach, like, why don't you have a course that's designed for sustainability? And I was just like, because actually you've got to scrub that. Everything we do and touch has to be sustainable. Okay, it's not an added option. It's not a bonus. It's like, and what we need to start thinking about is, rather than designing for other people's consequences, we need to design for mitigation. So a really good example of that is not going, hey, let's create a completely different food waste system. It's like, no. How do you remove food waste before you've even left the house to go shopping? Okay, how do we start to think about these things at point of source? And this is when it starts to become interesting and exciting. So for the next 4 years, we'll be doing this. We are going to try a whole host of things. Some will be very exciting, some might fail. We've got some amazing partners, which the Crafts Council, thank you very much, is one of those, working all over the UK. And we will also be having funding rounds that if you're partnering and you're benefiting the UK, then you can also apply for. So those will be open. So I was talking last night, and last night I was very honoured to be hosted at your gala dinner. Thank you for that. It was wonderful. And quite a lot of things came up, and one of them was that certain people don't have time to read enough. I think it's really important to contextualise what we're talking about, and I'm more than happy to share these slides. I think reading is absolutely critical. I'm hideously dyslexic. I only found out I was dyslexic when I was like 25. And I was like, oh, right, that's why. But I've been a maker all my life. And I think it's really important to also proactively and positively disagree. So in the questions, I'm coming from a particular contextual cultural viewpoint. If you disagree with me, brilliant. Let's have a conversation, because I don't think I'm solely right. Okay, I say that with open arms. I think it's really important that what I'm talking about today is from my cultural and contextual background, and yours will be totally different, which is brilliant. So I'd love to unpick that with you as well. So I think how we're starting to look at these things, especially I was really lucky. So I was at the RCA previously with Sir Christopher Frayling, and I think he's got a really good handle on what crafts practice is. You know, and he did an immense amount for how we talk about design research, design process. I think what is a designer is a really, really important thing that I want you to capture in your heads. And it speaks to what you were talking about earlier. I think there are several sides. There's the business of design, which quite often happens entrepreneurially. Okay, it happens with, oh, can we do this? And what you should be doing is cultivating the next project that's a year ahead whilst you're doing that, And you kind of learn that by doing and being proactive. It's a very difficult skill to teach, okay? Because it's not you have to understand how you are going to intervene in that business, because the business won't do it for you. They won't go, oh, we could use your skills. You have to flip yourself. Okay, so defining what is crafts and what's crafts practice is absolutely critical. I think the two most important people. So I think Christopher Frayling has always had an amazing perception on kind of like how craft works with industry. And when you mean industry, I'm not talking about mass manufacture. Okay, I'm not talking about, so when we often talk about it within the college, what is appropriate and what is contextual. So when I talk about technologies, right, a technology is a pencil. Okay, it's a collection of materials that are appropriate to use for a certain thing. It's an unpowered technology, but it's an amazing technology none the same. And I think we need to start questioning when we're going, oh yeah, but we can use AI. Yeah, great. That's fab. I don't disagree with you. I think it's a really competitive, interesting tool when used appropriately. It's not a fix-all. And I think that sort of next wave of like, where does intellectual property sit? How is that going to be? Where does Creative Commons? How's that going to work? Like, no one's even touched these things. So that's why when I bring back preferable futures, I think everyone in this room and online, we are responsible for going, what are the futures that we want to create? And how do we want these things to be located in and around them? If you don't know David Pye's work, I'd really encourage you to check it out. So he's got a really, really interesting perspective that he was one of the first people to really start designing and manufacturing machines to make craft. And everyone went, oh, so is that allowed? Is that okay? It's like, of course it is. Because what is craft? And I think it's really important to continually question that in a really positive way. And again, I was talking last night to some of the colleagues, and I think not just in a kind of academic sense, but actually understanding it, reframing it, recontextualizing it is really, really important. Okay, because everyone sees it within their different cultures with completely different values, which is really important. I'd also like to note that some of this writing, so David Pye published this in just before the 70s and the 60s. That's really interesting. Okay, so some things that we look at are not broke. Okay, some things we already know this information. We just need to almost look back a generation. So it's about picking again what's appropriate and what we leave behind. So I'm a product designer. I've also been a blacksmith. I've made longbows. I used to work in Forlì, just near Bologna, designing bulletproof ambulances. I used to be a bushcraft instructor, user-centered designer, educator. I've sold a number of patents. I've worked commercially as a designer for, how old am I? Quite a while. I'm now a designer researcher within the college. And quite often, you know, we ask our students, you know, what do you stand for? What do you believe? And there's an amazing independent activist, industrialist that lived in my hometown called Thomas Paine. And he wrote this quite a while ago, 1745. And he said, the world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion. And like you can take it as cheesy, but I genuinely believe that as designers, we should have a positive impact in the world that we're doing. So I live in a small town in Lewisham, in East Sussex, which is just above Brighton, so in between Brighton and London. And if you live in a small town, you make. That's what you do. You go and work for the, so, you know, I used to weld gates. I used to work at the local blacksmiths because there's nothing else to do, right, in a small town. And usually when you're about 12, 13, it's mainly to either accrue finance so you can take your friends to go and have some drinks, or so you can talk to people, or you might be able to meet members of the opposite sex and go, hey, let's go for dinner. Okay, that's pretty much how the world works. So a bit about background and context. So when I left my my BA, I helped set up a materials company called D3O. And so I've designed everything from bulletproof jackets. If you ever go to the UN, you'll see the world's first bulletproof wallpaper. It's pretty cool. We also have worked looking at teaching riot police tactics, working in Brussels. And then I was involved in the 2012 Olympic Rings. So I think it's really important that we start to think about what making is and how it sits. And I think craft is something that pervades all of those insights. I'm going to come back to your comments on bikes. So I've also helped build a mountain bike company, and these are a collection of some of our frames, our products, our objects, and people doing really stupid things on them, not dying, which is always good. And it started out by 5 people in a chicken shed, and they were an amazing team to work with. And they started to understand how they could manufacture and mass manufacture at scale. Now they've got 50 people working next to the chicken shed, okay, and they're building internationally. They've got a sales team. These things take time. And I think people want to go from zero to output so quickly. Actually, you need to go, what is the opportunity? What are you building? How are you building it? Yeah, we did some stuff for Red Bull, and he did live. He's all good. You got to see it landing, because his mum slept tonight. It's fine. But it's amazing when we start to understand our limits, and we start to give tools to other people to go, hey, can you do this better than me? And the best thing that Red Bull do is they often go, hey, look, we've got some amazing tools, some amazing kit. They find the best athletes and they go, there you go. And they go on and they go, oh, can we have a camera and we'll sponsor it? How do you learn to let go of projects is really important as a designer. I don't think there's like a given, okay? Sometimes quite a lot will talk about tacit knowledge as well, rather than just solely having everything that you know within the world. So within my PhD, I think you've always got to have a skill set that you apply within a wide range of things. And this was quite a few years ago. I was looking at colony collapse disorder within beekeeping. And so we started to go, well, actually, using open design and social innovation, what happens if we create kits for beekeepers to deploy and start to understand the IoT that was happening and information that was coming from their hives? Super, super interesting. The problem is that it raised a whole host of other issues. Okay, why? Because how are we going to openly share data? What happens when we start to think about if that's sharing disease, how these things are going to work? So when you put stuff into the public domain, these things become really, really critical. Unfortunately, this was during the pandemic, but it was pretty cool to design parts and components to get young people winning gold medals. It was a major high point in my career. And I'm a massive advocate for young people. I think they're pretty amazing. And I think now more than ever, they're having the hardest time, especially post-COVID. And I think, you know, those lessons of kind of like Saturday jobs within the UK, they don't exist. You have to make those opportunities. So yeah, Charlotte won a gold. That was pretty cool. And sort of finally, sort of from background sense, when I finished my PhD, I got talking to Thames and Hudson, and they went, do you want to write a book? And I went, I naturally kind of am the, I don't know, not working class lad, but I go, come on then, I'll give it a go. And so this is now in publication, looking at basically how we can really think about what we're doing with our future. So, I mean, I'm not advocating going by the book, but hopefully one of my students has photographed it and ripped it, and there's a copy on the internet. But please have a look at some of the projects in it, because it was amazing to digitally travel around the world, essentially, and interview all these amazing people just going, hey, look, how are we talking? What are you doing? Because I think there are so many opportunities for disruptive open innovation, crafts practice, thinking even, you know, I have students now that they live in London, but during the pandemic, they were working in Washington, DC in a design consultancy because basically they shifted the time zones that they were working. Amazing. That would never, ever have been possible. So next phase, what is ecological citizenship? So this is something I feel quite passionately about. We are all citizens of the world, and I'm quite utopian. I'm aware of that. Okay, we're allowed to be utopian. Okay, I think the biggest challenge that we often have is that, you know, most of our mechanisms for how we think about sustainability in practice are based around our motivations or what we're going to get from it, rather than just like, right, actually, how can we do more good? How can we make less impact? Or as my 4-year-old son, and he came up with a quote the other day, which I thought was brilliant. It's like, how enthusiastic we should be as enthusiastic as a 4-year-old in a Batman t-shirt. And I was like, yes. And he was just like, Daddy, just make it gooder. I was like, I love that. So he'll be quite chuffed that I said that. And one context that I think really defines ecological citizenship is the craft and the practice of hedge laying. If you've ever been involved in it, if you've ever observed it within the UK, what these are is essentially natural fences where you cultivate a space that runs around a field or a perimeter of a property. You have to plant in a certain type of year. You have to cut at a certain time of year. Why? Because it's a live material. And I think people forget it, which is insane. I mean, I'm sure there are people in this room and online that when you go, hi, I've crafted this object out of oak, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't like the worming. It's wood, it's material, deal with it. I think we need to learn how to have this vocabulary. And I think it's really interesting. We're working within these ecosystems, okay? This is an example of it, a heightened example of it. But when you start to actually go, these are our materials, like, what happens when you take things to the dump? Seriously, it's a massive issue. So I've done a bit of work with Chris Packham, and I'll go into that in a little bit. And he tweeted this a couple of years ago. And what it is, if you can't see it, it's a little package of pears, and it says pears grown in Argentina, packed in Thailand, and he was sitting in the UK eating this. Our world is broken. And the problem it's broken is that everybody wants strawberries all the year round rather than when they're in season. So what we need, and I don't believe that it's just the consumer's problem, okay? We make choices based on our kids. The reason that certain supermarkets do really well, okay, is because of our practices, okay? It's because we want cheap food and we're allowed that. And what we need to do is give people better choices, okay, as makers, as manufacturers, as processors of this world. And I think it's really important that we look well outside design. So it's quite rare that I actually read design books. I think they're really important. I think they're really key. But actually, when you start to look at rewilding, like wool as an industry in the UK is so broken, it's insane, right? So we've bred these sheep, okay, and we put them on the hillside for wool, then they cost about £3, £4 to shear, but really the material worth is about £1.75, and most of the time people burn it. It's just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. So we need to be aware of how we're using these materials. It's an amazing place to start. I think two things I want to really get over is that we need to be aware of our biases. Okay, and you were talking about the limitations of how we're building businesses and the things that we need to look at. I think it's super important, but we all look at design through a certain lens. Okay, we all imagine things a certain way, so we just got to do it collectively. There's no other way. And I think Enzo Manzini said it, you know, how we design the conditions, that's really, really important. How we're fostering the spaces in which we're going to work, how we're setting and creating those conditions is absolutely paramount. So I've edited the reading list, and I think you should look at a couple of things. One, and it's a book that's just come out about rewilding. So there's an amazing site near me in Horsham called the Knepp Estate, K-N-E-P-P. It's a farm. They've opened it up. They now give, in the UK, it's tiny. It's only about 50 acres, 48 acres, I think it is. They give safaris, and they have more species returning within that space than pretty much the whole of the UK. It's insane. You can go and see purple emperors, and if you don't know what they are, they're amazing butterflies. They're about that big, super cool. It's beautiful and awesome. And they've written this amazing book of like, right, here's how to cultivate it. I also think you should look at citizens, because it is actually going, what does it mean to be a citizen? How are we being proactive in this culture? How are we starting to take control over what sustainable and sustainable practice is? And I think that's really, really important. Like I said, you can have a look at my book, but look for the projects, okay? I'm really like, I get quite embarrassed and very British about it. So anyway, there we go. So let's talk about kind of skills and making and materials, okay? So these things have been interwoven for quite a long time, okay? And when you start really looking deeply at some of these practices, okay, especially so thatching, absolutely amazing, Okay, it is insane that you've got someone who's cultivating a particular material, they're responsible for rewilding that space, then they go, what time of year are we going to cut it? How are we going to transport it to site, and how are we going to make it? Mental. And this is how we should be looking at using our materials, because before you've even cut it, you need to go, what's happening to it next year? How quickly is it going to grow back? Okay, so that then we're reducing the impact. We as human beings make an impact in the nicest possible way. Just sitting here breathing CO2, traveling, we do. We're not monks, okay? We just need to accept it, okay? Sustainability is not doing nothing. It's about how can we have better choices. And I think there's a big difference there, because quite often people get sustainable paralysis, like, I can't do anything because if I do something, it's going to be terrible. It's just like, we have to, like, unfortunately, we still live in a capitalist society, so we have to deal with that. But we need to think about how we're regenerating these spaces. And if you look at, say, for example, the Crafts Heritage list, there's some really interesting links within there. So they've got lobster pot makers, okay? And there's now only, I think there's 3 in the UK. But they used to make them out of willow. So they had a really good understanding of pollarding, how the trees were growing, how they were assembling. But they were also more sustainable. Why? Because they disappeared. They didn't introduce microplastics into the food chain because they were using natural materials. But we don't cover those skills anymore. Bonkers, right? The next one, coracle. I don't know if you've ever made one or if you've ever sunk in one. They are literally fantastic. They are contextual boats built very specifically for the rivers in Wales to transport things about. They don't work everywhere, and that's okay. I think the biggest challenge that we have with sustainable practices is people go, well, it works here, so we'll apply it here. It doesn't have to. If something has a sustainable practice and it works in one street because of its culture or its heritage or its location, that's a win, right? Not everything has to scale. And I think sometimes people view sustainability as this massive stick that goes, it has to make a mass manufactured business everywhere. It really doesn't. Okay, it has to be a business that literally self-sustains itself, that then builds jobs, because our jobs are going to totally change in the next 5 to 10 years as well. You're probably going to have 2 or 3 of them at the same time. Okay, it's going to be pretty interesting. So I've put down because we've done quite a lot of research on this, and I'll come to the list of skills that we need to kind of get to at the end. So local work studio, they're based near me in Barkham. Have a look at them. The most interesting thing they do for every build, so they are architects, designers, materials manufacturers, and what they do is they do a materials audit within 15 miles of any build location, and then they build from the materials within 15 miles of that build location. Okay, so sometimes when people go, hey, look, we've opened up a sewer, they go, oh, does that mean we can access the deep clay that's there? Yeah, cool. So then they schedule the time of the build to be able to do that. It's amazing. And when you start to think like that, actually you start to go, what? How you build a house in Malta is totally different to how you build a house in the UK. So why aren't our materials different? Why aren't they contextual and appropriate? And that's just being sustainable, right? Okay, it's kind of insane. Good, making my point. I love working with my students, and oh, we're being broadcast, aren't we? Yeah, quite often, I love it when they go, Rob, we're going to try this, and hopefully we won't get arrested. And I go, is it a good cause? And I'll go, here's a letter, because that might make a difference. And so our students started to literally create a materials audit around London. And they came across Selfridges, and Selfridges were throwing away the most amazing materials. And it was criminal, and they hid it. And so our students went, do you think we should? And we were just like, if you do it late at night, and you do, and they just, but you can't tell me about it. And so they did it, and they proposed it to Selfridges, and Selfridges were amazing. Selfridges turned around and gave our students a pop-up shop. They gave them a business manager, and they went, great, how can you turn it into something? Okay, so they started to sell basically Selfridges material back to them with design added on. genius, right? Absolute genius. So I was like, yeah, those students, super good. And then we get the opposite end of what I work in. So I also work in technologies, looking at bigger groups of how we're looking at citizen science. So this might be erroneous, but I think it's a really good example. So Public Lab, the public laboratory of open technology of science and systems, they're based in the US. They are one of the most successful academic, open source groups in the world. They're very niche, so that's why you probably haven't heard of them. You might have seen their work, however. So the Deepwater Horizon, and you might have seen a bit of the film. It's not a very good film. Mark Wahlberg, sorry, Mark. But basically what happened is BP caused one of the largest oil slicks, and it decimated an area. But then what they actually did was make it federal law that no one could, this was pre-drone, okay, so this is quite a while ago, no one could document the impacts of it, okay? How they handled it is seriously bad practice. So this group of scientists and designers, they got together literally in a bar, and they started to create, and this was in 24 hours, working with digital technologies and combining things. Helium balloon, digital camera, and they started to create a hack for Google Earth. Literally 48 hours later, that footage was on CNN. And it was just like design impact. Is that a designer's role? Is it not? What's the business model in that? We can get to that, but we should be doing cool stuff. So how we do that, I think, is really important. So we often in the college, we have what we call designers in residence, how you can deploy somebody to go, look, be a designer in an NGO. Why? Because you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And we can have a chat about it later because we're looking to do some exciting stuff next year, next couple of years. Final example, and then I'll jump to the next bit, which is Nature Watch. So in Bhutan, they had a massive challenge with young people going to the city, okay, to start to earn more money. And they went, okay, right, well, we've got this amazing indigenous knowledge about biodiversity, about farming, about food, about best practice. What are we going to do? So they created the vertical university, and they upskilled and they trained all of their local farmers to get qualifications, so then they could actually then start to think about how they were getting completely different wages. They set them up as professors. This is using elements of government funding. And now I think there's about 5 or 6 sites. Why? Because the kids want to stay, because then they can get a PhD, which means then they can earn more money if they choose to, but they're still building the local economy based around it. Crazy clever. So these are models that we can borrow and go, great, how do you do that? How can we borrow from that? How can we steal with pride? So I'm going to talk quickly about Nature Watch, because I think this will wrap it up in an example that will be quite contextual for you. So a couple of years ago, and this was a collaborative project with then colleagues from Goldsmiths, but they're now in Northumbria University. And we, post-PhD, post lots of Bs, we went, how can we leverage digital technology that people can build, repair, make themselves, use off-the-shelf parts that they can buy, they can use in schools to engage with the natural world? And we went, okay, the EPSRC gave us £1 million to explore that. Nice, we had 3 years to start executing it. So what we built was, or what the team built, was RFID bird ring sensors and trail cameras. So trail cameras they detect a movement and they activate, and then they record things. Okay, usually they cost about £200. Okay, we built our trail cameras for about 30 quid, which was pretty amazing. Okay, they use machine learning. Okay, so it's always on. When something moves in front of it, it turns itself on and takes a picture. We started to talk to the BBC, and their first response, I was like, okay, you're right, let's be dystopian. They were like, well, what if kids put it in like the toilets? And so we had that conversation. We went, okay, let's talk to head teachers. No one else was worried about it, and we never had a single case of anyone misusing it. But it was interesting, that was their first response. And so we started to test stuff. I know, it's dreadful, isn't it? We started to test stuff, deploy stuff, catalog things. over the course of 2 years, we had something like 3 million people, 3.5 million people saw and engaged with the project, and something like, I think it was about 150,000 cameras or something ridiculous was made throughout the UK. Okay, crazy. We were running stuff with the National Trust. We were on BBC Springwatch, which was pretty cool. Chris Packham, amazing, absolutely amazing person. And never underestimate YouTube. Okay, so we didn't even know this happened, but Maddie Moat, like, she's my kid's like idol, does children's BBC, so CBBC. And she just created a kit that we had held as a third party because we couldn't make any profit from them. So we just pointed our website to a group that put them together. She did a quick YouTube film on it. And again, boom, suddenly like 70,000 people went, oh, this is quite interesting. We worked with local cinemas to think about actually how can people create media content that then they can use within the cinema as trailers, that then also thinks about new funding models for cinema, which is like, okay, how are we thinking about green roofs? All good fun. I know, thanks EPSRC. In the UK, we have something called 30 Days Wild. So the wildlife trusts is actually really, really progressive. And so every month of June, they have 30 different activities, like one a day, to engage in the natural world. And so we took part in that again. And again, sort of in the space of a month, we had, I think it was like 850,000 people going, making cameras. And this was during COVID times. So quality was important, but it was also about that transitional step. So we had Unilever, Procter & Gamble that started to go, can we deploy some of your kits in our care homes? Why? Because then the residents will leave their chairs and go and change the batteries, because the batteries lasted about 24 hours. They were rechargeable USB battery packs. Why? Because they lead a less sedentary lifestyle. Amazing. That's super cool. But you never think about these things when you're working in a bubble. So people think that this is the product. Okay. And the Northumbria team designed, and then we co-designed, and then we worked to deploy it. We designed it specifically to go, you can make this on your kitchen table. It didn't look intimidating. It's a box with a bit of a bottle and some Sugru and a bit of code, but people always think this is the product. It's not. This is the product. We had so many narratives of people that would be like, oh yeah, well, I now do this with my dad, or I now engage with this, or now I've joined a bird watching club, or now I've become head of the Hedgehog Society at my school. Amazing. Amazing. It was like I mean, it's a terrible analogy to have, but it's like a gateway drug, gateway drug to nature. And one thing, this only happened like last week, and it leads nicely back into ecological citizenship. So this was a case of somebody in the top left-hand corner. They were starting to use these trail cameras, and they went, Rob, it's broken. It's not, the trail camera's not working, man. I'm not getting any wildlife. So we went to visit, and we're like, dude, that's because you live in a barren landscape with no biodiversity. Oh, look, you've got a cat. And suddenly it dawned on them that they had to have a relationship with the natural world that they had made. They had to be ecological citizens of the space as well as the camera. To be honest, we'd never sort of tried to achieve that in our wildest dreams. We just went, wow, we tried to catalogue it. And this has totally changed many individuals. So now they're actually lobbying, this person is now lobbying new build architects with how they start by thinking about biodiversity rather than thinking about the build, which is amazing. So that one family went from activist, sort of like from zero to activist. Okay, it took quite a while, but sustainable practice does take quite a while, I'm afraid. Okay, it is something that we have to get used to. Another book, please, this is brilliant. So again, I said at the beginning, I'm very lucky to live in Lewes. Lewes is a transition town. It's one of the first transition towns in the country. Rob Hopkins has this beautiful phrase, from what is to what if. And I give it to our students because it actually really thinks about how we're reframing. He doesn't pay me to say that. It is genuinely a brilliant book, and my students say it's a brilliant book. But how we're reframing what we should be doing, the research questions that we should be asking, how we're building on these things. And that's what we're doing within Ecological Citizens for the next 3 to 4 years with my amazing colleagues. So there are a lot of skills that we need to build, a lot. And the problem is that we're just scratching the surface of some of these. Okay, I think how we start to think about regeneration, how we start to almost design for exit before it's even begun, how there's so much to do. Okay, but we can't do it alone. There's some amazing initiatives within the UK. The natural history GCSE is one of those that is really starting to make ground in Barcelona. It's one of the first places to actually advocate for climate change qualification that all children have to go through. Amazing. So how can we as organisations pitch into those? Reading list again, if you didn't get a photo of it, there was brilliant. Last night, I had a really good conversation, and this is kind of like, I was like, what am I going to leave them with? And, you know, we talked for a while that like, no one cares about how we define craft and is it art or is it design? I'm a designer. Why? Because everyone understands it. Okay, if I'm doing some strange project, I'd say to the policeman near me, oh, it's all right, I'm an art tutor. And they go, oh, okay, fine. And they walk away. It's just easier because you don't get arrested. But I want to leave you with, you know, before we question, you know, oh, is this sustainable? Is this not sustainable? How should we be doing it? What do we want to sustain? Like, it's really clear, because then we need to catalyze people to get those skills. And I think, you know, is there some stuff that we just need to leave behind? What is that? Because that's going to be the hardest thing for businesses to do, because it's terrifying. How do we build part of those culture? When you look at Chippendale, one of the most dangerous things that he did was release his plans. You know, we're talking about that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but he realized that nobody else could emulate his skills. Super, super cool. We should kind of have faith in our skills. Okay. So if you want to work with us, like, our website is not up yet, but Emily, who might be listening digitally, sorry for putting this in. She'll tell me off when I say next week, but it should be, we're launching officially in September. That's our email address. We will be having funding calls and all sorts of stuff going on. We have some amazing colleagues that I also disagree with me, which is really good, because they catalyze and you go, yeah, you are right. Shut up, Rob. It's good. Thank you very much for your time.
Whilst we all look at Rob's book, does anybody have any questions for Rob that we can answer quickly? We have one here, the lady in the green top, if there's a microphone.
So we used to learn from each other. Unfortunately, today our children, and I have my grandchildren, it's a very situation different than it was. So we need, every country and everyone, we need to try to help our children and educate them from the very age of tenderly.
Yeah.
Both the education of everywhere and the community altogether. Because like you said, for me, it was something, I used to live in all these things. So we need to, but nowadays we have a different situation. And I feel that in our island, in our countries, we need to educate the children with the education, not only from the home, because our system nowadays from home is totally different. They don't, for example, I am a weaver. I am trying to teach from my workshop the children more than the adults, because they don't even know what is a pin, what is a piece of thread or whatever, or not even a button. So like you said, the sustainability starts from there. And if with the children, we work with them, we will work together and we will have a better life and a better world.
Totally. I mean, I think, so, but I think, so there's two things in there, and then I'm gonna, oh, it's disappeared and there's pictures of my kids, oh well. The picture that I showed about sustainability is making a feather stick. So you use a knife and sometimes either green wood, and you cut it in a particular way. And when I was a bushcraft instructor, basically, you would say to people, if you can't light a fire by making a feather stick, you're not allowed to have a fire. Okay, and people will be like, right, okay, I've got to cook my dinner, because it's a skill set. And I think sometimes it's just like, it's a bit like, it's okay to say no to our kids, right? Just like, no, you're not going to do this because you're going to cross the road and you're going to die. That is bad. Okay, we need to think about these things. I think what we're talking about there, it has to be contextual and cultural and appropriate, and it cannot be colonial. And what works in one location should be celebrated and shared, but it's not going to work everywhere, and that's fine. We need to stop getting this, like, here's a model and we can roll it out for 50 million people, because I think that's dangerous. So I think it's a case of, how do you match what young people want to learn and what you think they need to understand and grow? It's the same way that I have students that might have never worked in a design practice, but quite often we go, yeah, but you used to work at Tesco's doing the local supermarket or whatever for a Saturday job. That means you can talk to people, you can handle money, you can be trusted. Like, they have a completely different understanding. It's the same way that if you talk to anyone that has been a waiter or waitress, they have an empathy with, like, right, just tidy up the table after yourselves. So I would question, what are the skills do you think they need to learn, and how is that going to work? So like Schumacher College, I don't know if you're from, Schumacher College in Totnes, they have an amazing culture. Okay, because they teach them economics, ecology and design all together. And every single day, okay, for about an hour, all the students have to make something as a collective activity, because they talk and they do things. These things are really, really important. So
because
it's kind
if they
of,
start at the age of 20s, then I think it's too late for them.
Totally, I completely
like
agree.
she said, they have to learn basic skills from the beginning, because otherwise it will be too late even to communicate with each other.
Completely agree.
And on our islands now we have a lot of different people, different languages, different this and this. So our own culture, history, and whatever, I think it's even losing some of it, but we're gaining from others.
Yeah.
So we need to implement these to have real sustainable.
Absolutely. And again, it's just it has to work in those boroughs, and then it has to be talked about. It's not just an application to everything. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
No.
Rob, everybody, I think we've started. I can see everybody's minds whirling. I think there's been so much food for thought by Rob and our other speakers this morning. We can continue into the break, which is a slightly shortened break because we've had so many amazing chats. So if we could be back here for 12:05, we are going to have a discussion with our panelists, and there's a further opportunity for you to ask questions. So 12:05 back in here, please. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming back together. We're no doubt going to have a really lively conversation. I'm sure you've got lots of questions to ask our speakers from this morning. I'm really pleased that we have Elaine Falzon, who's going to be our moderator for this conversation. Elaine is a cultural manager with more than 10 years experience in the culture and creative sectors. She's currently a freelancer working in a number of different programs and projects. And currently she's working on strategic development exercises for the arts and has previously worked for the Arts Council of Malta, first as a performing arts executive and then as head of funding and brokerage. So please, Elaine, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, you can hear me. So thank you very much for this introduction. I was just saying it's really weird to just hear your bio out loud, so I wasn't too happy about that. It's an honor, a privilege to be here with you today. I'm to be joining this panel and asking some of the questions we have been thinking about. All the presentations were very insightful, gave us quite a lot of points to think about, and I really hope that we get a good conversation going based on what we heard this morning and based on your thoughts about the different subjects that we are going to tackle. So one of the points that sort of kept coming up in different ways was this idea of change, keeping up with change, change which is quite fast-paced, and that needs a level of flexibility, of adaptability in upskilling and addressed by upskilling and reskilling processes. Gloria, at one point you also mentioned that for experts they need to have experience, but how do you address that particular point when we are talking about keeping up with change that is so fast, that it is characterized by this kind of this pace, which is frenetic?
Okay, well, I'm not an expert. No, the thing is, change is a part of our life, and I think it's a good news, because if everything is a standstill, the world is ended. And they told this to us during the 80s, that the end of the world was there, and that things are gonna stay like that forever. That was the postmodern value of during the 80s, that the United States are gonna rule the world forever, and that was it. But no, things are always changing. So this is not the end of the world. And I think that the experience, it's easy. It's once in a time, so step by step. So we get the experience doing one thing one day and some other thing the other day. So things are gonna keep changing, and I think the only way to get this experience is going step by step and once in a time.
Stefano, do you have any comments about this particular point?
Yes. I think we're supposed to turn it off. I do agree with the previous comment. And I do believe that life is interesting because we're all asked to change every now and then. I do underline, though, that there are moments of discontinuity. There are phases in our history, in our life, where we are asked to make a step forward, to do something different, and to be quick. To set up an e-commerce website in 1995, that was the right move. If you do more or less the same thing 10 years after, well, it does not have the same impact. So to change and keep up with the rhythm of the world, well, it's also a matter of, being, to fit with the environment that we're dealing with. And this requires acceleration sometimes, and moderation some others. I think, 10, 12, 15 years ago, you remember, I go back to the slide that I projected, we were all asked to change rapidly, and to adapt to a new environment. I'm talking about the craft world. The impact of those tools 15 years ago was tremendous. You could really make a step forward and be different and be special. I'm not saying that today those tools are not useful anymore. Obviously they are. And let me say, the agenda has changed. The world is not looking for that kind of customization, all those things. As we saw in the last presentation, the world is asking for sustainability, whatever that means. And we have to face this new scenario. At the same time, let me be frank. 15 years ago, craftsmanship had an opportunity. I'm not saying that this is not true today, but I'm saying that 15 years ago, we all had an opportunity to merge, and to be at the junction of an impressive let me say, change or a revolution. I don't know whether that was a revolution or not. I think today, sustainability is much more complex, environment. I think that yesterday, according to the UK press, it was the hottest day of the world ever in history. So decarbonizing the economy, decarbonizing our society is the issue, What is the contribution of our skills? I'm talking on behalf of this world to decarbonize, the current Western economy. Let me say the Western economy. I think, today, the agenda has shifted, and obviously what we saw in the presentation, the idea of creating your own camera, discovering the natural world around us. Believe me, I live in Venice, so I do deal with nature, winds, high tides, all these things. So I know what you're talking about. But I do believe that this is more a collective transnational effort, scientists, people finding a solution to find an alternative to rare earths, for instance. And so this is why I say, okay, change is important. There are phases where change is a tremendous opportunity, and we have that. Now I think we do have an opportunity, because I want to end up at a positive note, and it's social sustainability. And that was the message that was sent at the beginning of our session this morning. We do have to deal with several talents. We need to enlarge the scope of our, social recognition. We need to allow people to do different things. And not all people are made, to deal with mathematics or coding. This is not true. And this is just a very small fraction of the population, even in Europe and in the United States, where we have a well set up education system. And we need to enlarge that scope. We need to give people the opportunity to express themselves, to grow professionally, to grow from a human point of view. In this phase, I would say that social sustainability is the change we have to look for. And this is where we can create value for the society, not just in economic terms, but also in social terms. This is the change we need to promote. At least this is, I understand, I'm an economist, so I apologize in advance. But I do believe that studying economics gives kind of a good perspective to evaluate the speed of that change. You have those window opportunities, you have to catch them, and otherwise, you get lost. Today, we have a different kind of change. We have a different opportunity. We have a different change in front of us.
But how do we practically, on a practical level, right? Because I think we all agree that this is something which is important. It was mentioned, but how do we effectively go about doing that? Rob, I mean, the question earlier from one of our audience was very relevant, I think, even within the craft sector. Like, you work on your own thing, you do your own thing, you become your own kind of your own business, and you start selling. Perhaps I'm simplifying it a little bit, but that's the usual process that is followed. So how do we now recognize the individual talents that were mentioned and start working collectively on a practical level? I know we mentioned projects as an example, but how can we do that? How can strategies, policies try to address this particular point?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the good and challenging question. I think, first of all, we need to really acknowledge, again, the situation and the context of where you're trying to do that, because so often you can go, right, okay, how can we digitize a business model? How can we start to license it? How can we start to look at other elements? We might not whether you like it or not, but you know, and unfortunately it's a business that's now changed dramatically. But like Kath Kidson, back in the day, she used to be a traditional screen printer. Then it started to become a massive business, and then it started to change and it started to evolve, and it kind of just became a sort of point of licensing. So I think starting to think about the barriers to entry is really, really important. So, and this will make sense. TfL, Transport for London, many years ago, when they started to introduce the Oyster card. So it's a digital payment card to get around London. The best thing they realized was 6 months before they launched the Oyster card, the card clash was going to be a massive challenge. So your debit card and your Oyster card, if they were in the same wallet, they could either counteract each other or cause a payment issue and all sorts of things. So they realized that the biggest piece of work was the communication piece of work of like have them separate before they launched the Oyster. And so I would go, you know, how can you look forward and also backcast in your business to go, you know, how can we start to make step change? So it's like, yeah, you can build an e-commerce site, but you can also, there are many, many successful businesses that just have a social media channel because it's free and they sell through that. And then they go, we're going to try that for 6 months. Then in 6 months' time, we're going to see if we can generate enough revenue to, so it's being strategic. And I think, you know, it's the same way that, you know, standards and materials and processes are delivered. Again, I'm going to use a different London example, but Grenfell Tower is a terrible catastrophe. But people weren't looking at the standards of materials they're using. And so within crafts practice, you're always thinking, actually, what's the provenance of where my materials are coming from? And as soon as you can go, I know where this has come from. I know exactly who dug it up, who mined it, that becomes a commodity in its own right. So there are a number of challenges. I think the biggest thing is kind of where you choose to start. And I think that is all contextual on the business that you're creating. And so sometimes, you know, you also see the flip side in crafts businesses where they scale too quickly and then they fall apart because they cannot cope with literally churning out that demand. And I think that's really important. And it depends where it sits. I mean, you know, one of the most, because I was doing some work recently, one of the most kind of interesting examples within materials provenance, cost and profit margin and market is actually in the UK is craft beer, because it's one of the cheapest things to make that sells for one of the most expensive elements based on the way and the location that it's communicated with. So some really interesting models to look at that you can go, how have they done that? Again, it won't be applicable to all, and it's a contextual example. That makes sense.
Yep. And I actually have another question about contextualization, which is taking it a little bit like to another level. But you spoke about contextualization, and I feel that this is deeply challenged by globalization, by mobility, by even new workforce, which is characterizing very much the different locations. So how do you ensure that there is enough flexibility to cater for this change? You know what I mean?
Yes, good question. I think, again, if you look at different businesses, for example, like Artec is a really interesting group, because for years what they've done is they've cultivated their own forests to then leverage their forests to make furniture from. So the reason that you buy an Artec store, even though IKEA has copied it, I mean, and again, there is a cost implication there. But you know exactly where it's coming from. You're buying into that narrative, and it's numbered, it's serialed, it's kind of. So I think there's always going to be this challenge of like, what is your unique selling point? How is that going to be? But I think, yeah, it's not something that you can just apply to all. You know, I mean, there was some. I think it was Ferrari. They had a really interesting business model where they said they would fly you out to pick up your car from Modena, and then they would pay for all the hotels as you drove it back to your house, because that was cheaper than shipping it. So it was one of those things that it was good business sense, but they sold an experience. So it's a really specific example for that. And I think, you know, so many things have changed as well, because now people aren't just selling products, they're selling workshops, they're selling experiences, like come and make with me, come and build with me and learn those skills.
So it's what Stefano was pointing out earlier. It is about the experience after all. Yeah. Do we have any questions for our panel members? This is our opportunity to discuss these points in some more details.
Yeah, maybe I'd like to add to Rob's intervention that the common sense tells us that the bigger and the older you are, the less flexible you may be. So maybe with little structures, this idea of flexibility can be more approachable. The logic tells us that it's not always true, because if you're a big company, maybe you have also the capacity and the resources to have other lines of production and be there more flexible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in this context, it's hard to say, but yeah, be flexible is always a good, refreshing start. For every purpose. So yeah, keep in mind that maybe you're good at something, but maybe you are good at something that it's gonna have an end at some point. Yep. So you're always with, I don't know how, I think that in Italian you have a really nice expression that you have to have your feet in different shoes, no? Il piede mille scarpe. It's a kind of always looking with another eye at the other side, like an strategic strategy. Always in case.
Exactly. And that's a very, very good point. In fact, Stefano, with your examples, I think that was exactly what you were clearly demonstrating, that you can kind of get different sectors to talk together, to work together, to look at what you're saying, like a final an end rather than, and go through the process together rather than kind of seeing different ends. But I wonder if you, like, with this project, it worked. You're seeing that there are improvements. You're seeing but perhaps can we share some more experiences or some more insights into how we can go about, you know, because we all say, like, the art sector and all the other sectors, yes, we need to look beyond our sector. We need to work together. We need to do this and that. But how do we effectively do that? Go about, like, pointing out that, listen, we need each other. We can work together. We have one aim, so let's go for it together.
Well, I go back to the observation of the daughter of. What I learned myself in my experience is that having groups of, you know, young students working with already established, talented, you know, craftsmen, I think it works. But, you know, I take your question very seriously. What can we do more, or how can we promote this kind of exercises outside domestic boundaries? Well, one aspect that I do understand, you know, answering the question, the point that was raised about jewelry maker that we heard about, is that we need to, you know, let people experiment entrepreneurship in a very broad sense. The shift from hobbyist to enterprise is a huge shift. It's not an easy task. It's not something that, but it is something that today I would consider probably the most important steps many of these people should take into consideration. When you start a business, it's usually something that you enjoy, something you have fun. But to move from that culture of prototype that we also saw in those cameras, and this is something that I personally enjoy, absolutely, into a business, into a well-structured organization. This is something that I understood is much more complicated than expected. And this goes back, not only to accounting, as it was pointed out before, it is also general management, how you structure all this, how you keep it working, how you do storytelling was pointed out before. It's not, coherence, as she pointed out. It's kind of a very difficult task after a while. You have to be coherent with what you just said, the day before and the day before. You have to maintain, just to go back to the point, what I understood is that we have been emphasizing, skills in craft and digital literacy and so on. Design, obviously, but then, you need to, let me say force, it's probably a bit too strong, but encourage, let me say so, something bigger, something more stable. How do we move from that intriguing, garden into a more, structured activity? This is a huge step. Is this relevant? I mean, shouldn't we have also a world of hobbyists or very small businesses? I do things at home. I sell them on Etsy. I make my own living. I mean, I think, we can live with that, but I do feel like, if we want to gain traction and relevance, some of these activities should be able to transform themselves into something a little more, robust. How do we do that? This is a question. This is for next year.
Because we prepared the agenda really.
It is otherwise, we have this ecosystem. This is the way we call them, where we have people coming from different sectors like pharmaceutical, activities, or energy, or microprocessor chips, looking at, craft as a kind of a hobbyist environment. We need to kind of rebalance a little bit. I say all this as an economist, but I think this shift is the new big in Italy, and now I look at Elisa, in Italy, this has been kind of a characteristic trait of our economy in the 70s and in the 80s. We've been able to move from a, let me say, traditional craft into a more structured business environment, but it is complicated.
I think this is very interesting, very important that you acknowledge that there are different levels of engagement with the sector as well. So there's nothing wrong with having
Absolutely.
I think we saw a major focus on crafts, on the arts, on sport, for example, being a very valuable, important terms of well-being, general well-being as well. So acknowledging that it is part of the sector is perfectly fine in my opinion. So yeah, it's about having these different levels, and wherever there's the opportunity, kind of then upscaling that. So yeah, we actually have a question from someone who was following us online. I found Gloria's presentation really interesting, but questioned the statement, "Do not improvise." Yet craftspeople surely improvise and problem solve all the time in the making process. Isn't the value of craft, as described by Rob and Stefano, that craft skills have value in a wider context and that requires makers to be innovative and to improvise? I don't know if you have any comments about that.
Yeah, I realize that there's a contradiction. We are on one side trying to get this challenge of being always innovative and changing, but on the other side, we say, don't improvise. Yeah, let me say that I was thinking about improvising, like, okay, don't thinking and being focused in something that you're doing. And of course, with experimental activity, you need to improvise. You need to do something like, okay, let's try it. But it's a method. Even when you improvise, you need to have notes about how many, a clear example. You are following a recipe and you decided that, no, okay, I'm gonna change it. But you need to have notes about how many changes you have done. If not, you're not gonna be able to have conclusions about your experiment. And I was talking about don't improvise in this sense. Okay, improvise, but then you need to know how to repeat your improvisation. So it's a kind of complicated thing, but I think it's more or less like this.
It's about having that discipline as well to
something
be able
methodic
to
in your progress.
Yeah.
Let me add one comment on this. You know, I've been involved in the Maker Faire, the Rome edition, the European Maker Faire for 10 years, and let me say that prototyping, quick prototyping, improvise, that was a mantra. I mean, makers are, let me say, obsessed with that. You know, I want to do things, and I need to create something. And I totally buy, you know, that perspective from a cultural point of view, from a human point of view. Let me say, though, that when I stressed earlier the relevance of a method in pedagogy, in you know, in structuring, you know, the process, you know, this is crucial for young students, especially, you know, from a personal point of view, at home I can do whatever I want, you know, free to do whatever. But if we deal with a generation of 20-something-year-old, we do have a responsibility, and we need to teach them, we need to give them, we need to provide them with a methodology. In that perspective, design thinking is I'm not saying that this is the methodology, obviously there are several, but let me say that the design thinking is really what she was pointing out, a methodology which makes prototyping accountable. Why did you do that? You know, did you talk to the people that at the end of the story will use that object, or, you know, will leverage on that technology, or will somehow transform the world with your utensil? You know, did you talk to them? And did you really focus on the key aspects of that project? You know, that kind of discipline is fundamental. Otherwise, you never become accountable, which is, in your perspective, you cannot go back and say, where did I do something wrong? You know, where is the missing link? Why did I get lost in that phase? We need to provide, especially young generation, with a clear methodology, not to make, you know, prototyping effective 100%. I mean, you need to learn that we often fail. I mean, it's you know, I do, you know, I gave you a success story. If you ask me, I can give you several unsuccessful experiments I've been carrying out. But and I take it very seriously. I know that it's easy to fail, but you know, you need to be accountable. You need to say, well, I failed because in that part of the process, I didn't take into account that and that aspect. You know, if otherwise we have, there was that person, that character in the Nemo. What's in the Nemo? The fish that always forgets things. Well, otherwise you have this Dory effect. You know, what did I do wrong? You know, I don't know. I forgot it. And this is not the way we think about our society in general. This is very dangerous. You know, you set up a process which is dangerous not just for your business. This is dangerous in general. If you're not accountable, if you're not in charge, if you're not taking care of your own affairs, this is something I should be, we have to be all concerned about.
I wonder what you think about early education in this respect, because obviously you were saying about changing or rather readdressing a way of thinking, of developing, which comes at a later stage, perhaps when we would have already kind of formed our way of thinking, of looking at work and things. So I wonder what you think about this in relation to early education. I know that this was discussed as well with the group yesterday.
I tell you, I've been consulting the Ministry of Education for several years, too long. But I am consulting the Ministry of Education, and I always had huge fight with them because that shift that I pointed out earlier, from discipline-based to problem-based learning, from individual to collective, from traditional hard skills. I'm not saying that hard skills are not relevant. I mean, I do take it very seriously, but they're not enough. You need to complement that package of hard skill with soft skills. The storytelling, for instance, that we talked about. In traditional education, there's kind of an inertia. It's very hard to transform our education system. I'm sure that there are other experiments in Europe. In Italy, I have to say that this shift is very problematic, and it's an issue. I would say that this inertia is a problem.
Yeah, I agree and disagree. And again, my opinion is based on the context of where I'm from. I think we need to learn how we chop up the job that we do. And so what I mean by that is one thing I set our students, which is actually really hard. I say, talk to one interesting person a week. And they start to go, okay, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the cleaner? I mean, no. Talk to a factory. Talk to someone that works in the factory. Talk to someone at the exhibition. Talk to someone internationally. You can have a Zoom call. Get in the habit. The same way that we set up a business, okay? You will have your 9 till 3, which is your work a day, sorting things out. Then you will also have your strategic work that is looking for new business, social media, however you describe it. You'll also have things that are risk. You'll go, I should meet that person because they're really interesting. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but I wouldn't give it a day. I would give it an hour and I would see what happens. And I think the thing is, so we have one whole unit at the RCA, which is basically the students, we get engineers to fail. They have to fail. And then they have to respond from a position post-failure, because then we've been dealing with people that have been working in industry for 10 years and have never failed. And it's such a breakdown for them. And you go, no, look, now you've done it once. How do you grow from it? And I think, when we're talking about business, I think it's very easy to talk about traditional models of business. Whereas actually, when you start to go, so academics, myself, I freelance, I consult, I generate patents, I write, I publish, I also tutor students, and I also get funded projects that pay for my own time that I give back to the institution. I think those lessons, some of them can't be taught. Some of them you have to be brave to try things. And I think the problem is that we do need to give students methods, but also we need to go, look, this is whenever you go to a trade fair or you're showing work, there's a risk. There's a risk that, you might not sell enough at that trade fair to cover the cost of that trade fair, but you might do it in 2 different locations or however you're running your business. And you kind of weigh up, who am I going to see? How's that going to work? And it's a balance. I think, it's something, the elements that are kind of almost unsuccessful or that are challenging, those are quite often the things that totally change the way you're making business and doing things. So I think also education needs to really give a safe space to fail and grow positively. And by fail, I don't mean catastrophic failure. I mean, right, you've done a project for a week, let's reflect on it. How would you do it better? How would you, but I want to join it back to, yeah, how do you chop up your job so you're making sure that literally you're giving half an hour a day to elements and things that are strategic, that are well moving you in the next 2 to 3 years? I think it's hard, but that's part of the discipline, the same way that a ceramicist might try new glazes in a kiln. That's taking a risk because you're trying something out. It's the same thing, but how you're doing it with your time, and it's a balance.
Let me say just one. You know, I after what I heard, I would add to the list, the two lists, say from lecturing to coaching. I tell you this because I made experiments at my university. I have a class with 150 students. I do a good course on e-business, and I always get good grades, good evaluations, and so on. And then this year, I took 10 students, and I said, with 6 of them, I will do a particular job, 6. And I started working with 6 students that changed dramatically. And I've been doing this, you know, as described, you know, mentoring them, saying what was wrong in that presentation, how do we change that part of the document? Why didn't you, you know, dare? Why weren't you brave in that occasion? Let me say that from lecturing to coaching, there is a key economic variable, it's cost. You know, you have to move from 100 people to 10 people or 5 people.
Oh, 1 on 1.
And this is something that we're not, as education system, we're not prepared to do. I mean, this is out of scale. This is not comprehensible for our managers, for our, you know, directors. This is way out of scale.
Yeah, some of us were in Dublin last February with knowledge experience in the National College of Art of Dublin, and I have retained a commentary of a teacher there, a art textile teacher, and she said literally, we encourage mistake. So I was there like, okay, telling this out loud in a school of art is comprehensible, but I cannot imagine this in the University of Medicine, for example, teachers telling us, we encourage mistakes. No, please stop. No, okay. Yeah, we have this sector in which the mistake is welcome, because we know that sometimes in the mistake, we maybe find something profitable. So yeah, we encourage mistakes.
Yes, I think we have a question over there. We have a few minutes before we conclude the session.
Okay, so I would like to follow up on a couple of issues. The first is that I think it's critical to fail and to learn from your failures, especially if you're a small business, because that's the only way you actually can pivot in the right direction. So I actually embrace failure. The second thing, though, is I'd like to touch on that when we started as a jewelry business, my daughter had studied sustainability as part of her university degree. So everything we did was sustainable from the outset. The processes, the manufacturing, the material sourcing, everything. And I think I speak for a lot of the local craftspeople who are here today, and the circular economy and all that kind of stuff is something that we've already embraced. But our clients don't. They're not willing to pay extra for this extra cost of recycled materials. They're not valuing the fact that the wood that's being used is coming from recycled wood. So where do we square that? Because we've actually now dumbed down our marketing from sustainability, which was a very, very, very prominent early, marketing tool that we used. We've learned from that quotes unquote failure not to go there. We've even heard clients turn around and go, I don't want secondhand anything. And even when we tell them that a single gold wedding ring creates about 20 tons of waste, God knows how much cyanide and other poisons into the environment, they still don't want secondhand materials. And I would love your opinion on how we work with clients to, I mean, we're doing everything we can to educate them, but you can take the horse to water. So I'd love to know how to square that circle.
Thank you for that question. I think, Rob, because in fact, I also wanted to add on to this question. I was going to ask and challenge your statement. Kind of, you said giving people better choices. So better is relative, of course, as she's saying, like it can be anything.
Yeah, the problem is that we're the problem. It's quite often design as a practice and as an industry moves faster than people can catch up with. And I think how we understand kind of as a communication piece or as a kind of how we're building agency. So I'm going to take it to an example. So we were working with Fudge's biscuit factory. It's quite a few years ago. They make really good biscuits, you know. And they started to look at the material waste they were using. And in a really quick session, we were just like, why don't you make hexagonal biscuits? So then when your die cuts come out, you don't get any waste material. And they just went, yeah, because it's good business sense, it's viable, it's cheaper, everything else. The problem that they had was people turned around and went, yeah, we don't like eating hexagons. And you're just like, God alive. I think there's a lot in how we educate and build people's capacity for what is, I mean, like palm oil and impacts of so many materials are just not talked about enough. People have no idea of, you know, for example, e-waste, a classic example, you know, big tech has been shipping lots of laptops, computers, they're already broken, right? But they ship it to Africa going, we're donating you this and you really want it. Oh, sorry, it turned up broken. It's like I'm being recorded or whatever. They're being naughty. And I think the problem is that at the end of the day, people are answering with their money because they're going, I can buy this here or I can buy this here. And it's a massive challenge. It's the last threshold to overcome. I think there are some really interesting companies that are starting to think about how they're doing that within those mechanisms, but it's not perfect. The problem is it's kind of, so Jessie Baker, she runs a really interesting organization called Provenance. It's a digital platform that basically lets you trace absolutely everything. And they generated all this data, they generated all this process, amazing, but people have to realize why that's important. And so quite often you have to go, well, this is because this is going to affect your children, or because, say, for example, our motivations for citizen science or for looking after spaces or beaches, we care about where we live, we care about where we go on holiday and where that space and that beach, if that's nice, maybe where our parents or grandparents live, and that's probably about it. And I think that's the challenge, is how do we start to find examples of good practice to go, no, I care about your beach because you live there. And I'm trying to draw parallels, but yeah, it's really hard. And I think the thing is that it's quite difficult to find examples that have done it perfectly at the moment, because I'm looking for them, most definitely. But I think, I mean, one last good organization to look at of how they're designing is Space 10. So Space 10 is an organization that is the strategic arm of IKEA, and they're doing really interesting work. It's sort of exploring strategies well beyond everything that they do is about sustainable practice 101. It's really good. And the other person that I would definitely look at is Professor Jonathan Chapman, a colleague from Carnegie Mellon. He's just published designing meaningful stuff with MIT Press, really good. And he's got quite a few mechanisms about how we can leverage fast and slow technologies, and public education is massively on the agenda. So yeah, I think it will get there, but it's running to catch up. And it's a further conversation that is quite difficult to answer in a very short soundbite.
Thank you very much. I believe you only have perhaps last minute just for any concluding remarks from your end, if there's anything else you need to add.
On my side, I think what you raised, I take it from a more general. I think, what we just heard was very inspiring. I think, on my side, I think there is an issue there. Craftsmanship, quality, customization do have a price. And people, they have to realize that price must be somehow paid. And there's no way that, your daughter, my friend, can work for free. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, this has created sort of a chasm in certain cases between what we usually call the middle class and, some of the products our craftsmen are capable of. And we need to be very careful about that, because the more, we overlap, we tend to overlap the word craftsmanship to the word luxury. The more we do that, we more, we are in danger, because, we go back to the very traditional approach. I'm a rich man or I'm a rich woman, and I don't buy the stuff you buy at Zara or at H&M. There's nothing new. I mean, what we discussed today is something new, or we try to emphasize a new trait, a new characteristic of craftsmanship. No, how do we do this? Experimenting, leveraging on design, leveraging on technologies, explaining the potential in terms of sustainability. Let me say that there is I totally buy, the perspective that we are sharing here. You talk about jewelry. I was in the Confindustria Moda, is the business association in Italy about fashion. And I said, I know that there is a huge issue here to move the idea of quality, Italian products supposed to be high quality product, from luxury to sustainability is complicated matter. I mean, it's not an easy task, but that requires a lot of innovation in managerial, like entrepreneurial terms. You need to have Depop and Vinted, those platforms where you can resell jewelry, but also obviously clothes. You need to have people like Ramosalso that refit your stuff, and you need to have some high quality basic materials in order to keep it alive, down the line. And you need to have renting services where, I might rent, you need to have that kind of innovation. It's crucial though. I think, you raised a very, very important topic. If we let the word craftsmanship overlap, with luxury, and, we don't create a new mix, I think, no, we lost a battle. I'm not saying we lost the world, but we lost a battle, a very important one.
Thank you very much. So one final comment from Gloria.
Yeah, no, in the same line, I think that usually when we see a successful business or people in every sector, not only in craftsmanship, usually those are business or people multi-talented. They are people with multiple intelligences, and it works for every sector except with football players.
So yeah, Rob, one final comment from you.
Yeah, it's a provocation. I think there's really great discussions, and again, there's never one answer. But I would just skip ahead. Let's skip ahead 20 years. And let's just imagine that you're only allowed in your life 50 kilograms of material, okay? Then you start to go, what happens at your child's 18th birthday? Do you give them a kilogram of material? Do you take that back? Do you choose how we're using materials? Where's the provenance of it? Where's it going to sit? Where's it going to live? And the problem is that kind of everyone in boiler suits, eat it, like that stuff will happen. Like at some point, legislation has to kick in. And so I think the thing sometimes as creative practitioners, as leaders, we've just got to go, right, actually, how do we take, not control is the wrong word, how do we steer so that we can have better choices and design it to be contextual? Because I think when we start to understand that sort of notion of this is the only amount of material that you're able to have or use, it changes things. And then have a really proactive discussion with MPs and policymakers, because they don't have a clue quite often what's happening on small scale businesses and how they're changing import-export laws. I mean, I haven't apologized for my government, but they are idiots. And Brexit's terrible. And they're still dealing with the legacies of it because they're just, it's exhausting. You know, and supply chains, these are our bread and butter. It's like, so I think, you know, we need to jump ahead and have more grown-up conversations about these really, rather than just, you know, promoting same old, same old.
Rob, Stefano, Gloria, thank you very much for your presentations. Thank you for your comments. They've been really interesting. Thank you, World Crafts Council Europe, for the opportunity to be here to discuss, to talk about the subject. And thank you to the Malta Crafts Foundation for your great work, great organization, and for bringing us together here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much. Just before I invite Elisa to come up and wrap up our conference, I just wanted to do one notice that I think is pretty relevant to the conversation we've had. In August, World Crafts Council Europe is really excited to be releasing a free online course on circularity for craftspeople, which is all about how businesses can think about and process and develop action plans to shift their business models to really take on this challenge. So there is some practical things coming to help our makers and our businesses on the way. So keep an eye out for that. Anybody can enroll. It's free of charge, and it's going to be an online course that's available for a year. So really looking forward to that. So without any further delay, if I could pass over to Elisa.
So it's a pleasure and to close the conference, our second international conference organized by the World Craft Council Europe in the framework of Crafting the Future project, co-funded by the EU. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I think that the conference was really interesting and with many, many topics, too many too. And I think that our humble role as WCCE Europe and as all the members of WCCE Europe, because we are all entities working to promote and to innovate and anyway to support crafts in our nation, in our countries, and at the EU level. It's really important for us to understand a little bit what's going on, and we need to transfer to our craft people as much as we can all this idea, all this topic. Of course, the world is evolving or evolving, it depends on the point of view, very quickly, very fast. So we need to pay attention to what we are doing to find a new solution, but not to hurry up to find them, because perhaps for our dimension as me, or also micro enterprises, we need also to wait a moment, understand better what's going on and where we can be in this process, because we need to understand what's going on, what you can do to help us what our countries can do to help us and our companies. As for instance, we have some support from the national government in Italy for the twin transition, digital and sustainable. But we will see, but it's important to understand that there are so many topics, so many ideas, so many inspirations, and we have a lot to do to work on it. So I will thank everybody or our attendees here physically and connecting online. It was a pleasure for us to be here. I want to thank once again Malta Craft Foundation because they hosted us for 3 wonderful days, and they did really a great job, and they were really warm to welcome us here in Malta, and it was a wonderful experience. I would like to thank also University of Valletta because we are hosted in their building, their historical building, very beautiful. Of course, all the local supporters by Malta that supported our presence here and all the organization of the GA, WCCE Europe GA and the conference. And of course, I would like to thank once again all WCCE Europe members, all WCCE Europe board members, all WCCE Europe staff members. So thank you to everybody. It was a pleasure and really thank you. And we have a good job to do. Thank you.